Clutching my 5-year-old grandson, I sat defeated on the freezing stone porch of the mansion in the pouring rain, reeling after my ruthless daughter-in-law used a broken antique vase as an excuse to throw us out. My son had vanished mysteriously 3 years ago, and now it was our turn to be discarded. Through the pitch-black night, a luxury vehicle suddenly pulled up to the curb. The woman stepping out was my ex-wife, whom I had divorced over 20 years ago. Looking at my pathetic state, she commanded coldly, "Get in. Thank you for being here with me." Before the story begins, drop a comment and tell me, are you listening during your morning commute or late at night winding down? I read every single one. Quick reminder, some details are fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. The message, though, that's what I hope stays with you. I was mopping the same white marble floor for the third time that day when my 5-year-old grandson knocked the porcelain vase off the shelf and gave my daughter-in-law exactly what she'd been waiting for. At 60 years old, after 30 years of active duty in the United States Army Corps of Engineers and 3 years acting as an unpaid glorified housekeeper. In my dead son's house, I had learned a fundamental truth about tactical displacement. The third time mopping the exact same spot means someone in authority is looking for a strategic reason to throw you out. The expansive floor was clean. It had been immaculately clean since my second pass at dawn. But Saskia, 28, sat on the white Italian leather sofa with her legs crossed and her smartphone gripped firmly in her manicured hand, watching my movements with the sharp, unblinking expression of an apex predator who had been waiting 3 long years for the perfect legal excuse to strike. "You still haven't gotten the far corners right, Clifford," she said without bothering to look up from her glowing screen. Her voice carried a practiced, aristocratic dismissiveness that made my jaw tighten. "I can see the dirty water streaks from all the way over here." There were no streaks. There was only the flawless, mirror-like reflection of the crystal chandelier hanging 20 feet above us. We both knew it. I silently wrung the heavy industrial mop into the plastic bucket, the sharp, suffocating smell of chemical ammonia burning the inside of my nose and throat. This massive Buckhead estate had 3 stories, 8 bedrooms, 9 bathrooms, and more square footage of cold white marble than I had ever seen outside of a federal government building or a military headquarters. For 3 agonizing years, I had kept every single inch of this place spotless, cooking 3 meals a day, scrubbing toilets, washing designer laundry, and watching over little crew while Saskia traveled across the country for urgent business or disappeared into her heavily locked home office for days at a time. My son Thane had been gone for exactly 3 years now. Missing, the Atlanta Police Department investigators said. No credible leads, no recovery of a body, no forensic answers, just completely gone into the dark. And somehow, through a series of tragic compromises, I had ended up right here, spending the twilight of my life mopping floors like a servant, while Saskia signed mysterious legal papers, transferred corporate funds, and made hushed phone calls in locked rooms I was strictly forbidden from ever entering. "Grandpa," Crew's voice shattered the tense silence. He came running wildly across the slick marble, his small bare feet slapping loudly against the wet surface, his dark hair messy from playing upstairs in the nursery. My grandson was a beautiful, heartbreaking mix of genetics. 5 years old with his father's gentle dark hair, but possessing his mother's sharp, calculating eyes. Except when he looked at me. When he looked at me, those sharp eyes melted, and he was just an innocent little boy who desperately wanted to show his grandfather a new crayon drawing of the 2 of us holding hands under a yellow sun. "Look what I drew, Grandpa. It's you and me, and we're building a giant fort." "Crew, stop running!" I shouted, my military instincts flaring as I saw his trajectory, but it was already too late. His small shoulder caught the edge of the mahogany display shelf. It wasn't hard, just a minor accidental bump from an excited child. But the heavy porcelain vase, some rare Ming Dynasty antique that Saskia claimed was worth more than I used to make in a whole year of federal service, teetered dangerously, slid toward the abyss, and fell. I saw the entire sequence in slow motion, a defensive reflex, born from 3 decades of managing structural failures and combat zones. My eyes locked onto the shelf edge in the single second before the porcelain shattered. Oil. There was a thin, glistening slick of clear mineral oil applied directly to the surface where the vase had been positioned. It wasn't dust. It wasn't clean water. It was a deliberate, lubricated trap, hidden expertly so that the slightest vibration or touch would cause any object placed upon it to slide instantly off the edge. The ancient vase hit the hard marble floor and exploded into 1,000 sharp white pieces with a deafening crack. Crew froze in absolute terror, his crayon drawing slipping from his fingers and fluttering face down onto the wet, chemical-soaked floor. Saskia stood up slowly from the sofa. There was absolutely no shock on her pale face. No maternal instinct to check if her son was cut by flying glass. There was only a mask of cold, unadulterated satisfaction, like a grandmaster chess player who had been patiently waiting 6 moves for this exact tactical position to unfold. "Get out," she said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm, almost pleasant, devoid of any human heat. "Take your pathetic things, take that clumsy boy, and leave my house. Tonight." "Saskia, look at the shelf," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous low gravel as I stepped between her and the trembling child. "The wood was oiled. You intentionally set this up." She smiled, a thin, venomous curling of her lips. "Prove it, Clifford. Prove it to the police or get out of my house before I press that panic button and tell them an unstable armed veteran is trespassing and endangering my son." I looked at the oil slick, at the ruined pieces of irreplaceable porcelain, at my innocent grandson trembling violently against my worn denim jeans. 30 years in the service, 2 combat tours, 30 young engineers who had followed my direct orders and survived because I could read terrain, anticipate hostile ambushes, and think 3 moves ahead of the enemy. And yet I had spent the last 3 years of my life mindlessly mopping floors, too completely broken by the agonizing grief of losing my only son to see the corporate trap closing slowly around my neck. "Come on, crew," I said, softly kneeling down to pick up the crying boy. "Let's go get your winter coat." "You have exactly 10 minutes, Saskia called out as she turned her back on us. "Then I am activating the security system and locking the heavy iron doors." How does a highly decorated veteran, a man who survived the horrors of Fallujah, end up on a stranger's porch in his own flesh and blood son's house with a 5-year-old child? And absolutely no tactical way forward. I didn't have a strategic answer. I just had 10 minutes before the perimeter was sealed. We didn't have much to pack because I had never truly allowed myself to unpack. 1 battered canvas suitcase containing my basic clothes, Crew's small school backpack stuffed with 3 plastic toys, a worn-out stuffed rabbit, and 2 changes of his clothes. My phone battery was completely dead, and the only working charger was located inside the kitchen, Saskia's territory now, and I refused to go back and beg her for it. My leather wallet held exactly $43 in cash and a single debit card connected to a veteran benefits account I hadn't dared to check in months. Saskia didn't even wait for the clock to strike 10. She grabbed my suitcase and threw it onto the front stone porch herself, the heavy latch cracking against the ground. The weather had turned brutal. A cold, relentless November rain had started falling, coming down sideways in the howling Atlanta wind. She stood framed in the warm doorway, watching with detached amusement, while I zipped Crew's thin autumn jacket and lifted his shivering body into my arms, his small wet arms wrapping tightly around my neck like a vice. "Don't ever come back, Clifford," she whispered through the narrowing gap of the closing door. "I'll have the private security patrol arrest you on sight if you're still on this property by morning." The heavy iron security gate slammed shut behind us, with the metallic, echoing sound of something absolute, something permanent that could never be undone by human hands. I stood on the freezing stone porch in the dark rain, holding the full weight of Crew and the handle of the suitcase, looking back through the glass at the mansion where my son had once lived, where he had proudly brought his new bride, where he had raised his boy for 3 years before he suddenly vanished into thin air. I had moved into this house thinking I was stepping in to protect my grandson from the chaos of loss. But the truth was far uglier. For 3 years, Saskia had simply been waiting for the exact right moment of vulnerability to discard me like common household trash. Crew's body weight in my arms was the only anchor I had left. That small warm pulse was the only thing keeping me from walking directly into the freezing downpour and never looking back. "Grandpa, where are we going to sleep?" he whispered, his eyes half asleep and crusty with tears against my wet shoulder. "I don't know just yet, buddy," I whispered back, my voice breaking. "But your grandpa's an engineer. We always figure a way out." I slowly sat down on the cold, wet stone stairs, because my knees simply couldn't hold our combined weight anymore. The November rain soaked completely through my flannel shirt, plastering my gray hair to my skull, dripping down my weathered face like the tears I was too exhausted to actually cry. I sat there in the dark and counted my remaining assets. 60 years old, 30 years of advanced military survival training, 3 years of taking humiliating orders from a woman who just threw me into the mud, and one 5-year-old boy who trusted me with his entire life. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a destination, but sitting there on that freezing wet stone, feeling Crew's small body shiver violently against my chest, something deep inside my subconscious shifted. The heavy, suffocating fog of grief that had paralyzed my mind for 3 years began to evaporate under a sudden spike of pure adrenaline. The survival instinct that had pulled bleeding men out of burning Humvees. In Iraq, the mind that had learned to analyze structural traps and think 3 moves ahead of a hostile force, that part of Major Clifford Garrison suddenly woke up from its long coma. I stopped being the broken housekeeper. I finally remembered exactly who I used to be before the world broke me, and that was the precise moment the blinding matrix of twin headlights cut through the dark rain. The sweeping glare of those headlights cutting through the driving rain was not a beacon of salvation. It was a cold, razor-sharp beam of a perfectly orchestrated ambush. It belonged to a black Cadillac Escalade, a monolithic, armor-plated shadow that rolled with predatory intent toward the curb of the Buckhead mansion. The heavy tires ground against the waterlogged asphalt with a low, threatening rumble that seemed to vibrate straight through the soles of my boots. When the driver's side doors swung open, a column of warm, amber cabin light spilled into the darkness, casting the silhouette of a woman I had spent the last 2 decades trying to purge from my memory. Teresa Caldwell, 58 years old. She stepped down from the towering SUV, the heels of her bespoke leather boots striking the puddle-strewn pavement with a series of crisp, unhesitating snaps. The charcoal gray cashmere overcoat draped across her shoulders exuded the unmistakable aura of someone who had spent 20 years building a financial empire out of the wreckage of our marriage, something cold, efficient, and entirely her own. She did not smile. There was no wave of recognition, no soft look of an ex-wife crossing paths with an old flame by chance. She merely stood there in the torrential downpour, looking down at my pathetic state as I sat defeated on the freezing stone porch, clutching my trembling 5-year-old grandson against my chest. "Get in the car, Clifford." Nip 3 words. No greeting, no exclamation of shock. 20 years of divorce, and 3 years of absolute deafening silence since the day of our son's empty casket memorial service, and she materialized on this exact street corner as if she had timed my eviction down to the very second. I didn't move. The primal instincts of a former major in the Army Corps of Engineers, a man who had survived the burning oil fields of Desert Storm and the shifting asymmetrical urban ambushes of Fallujah, instantly kicked into high alert. In the military, when an unidentified entity appears at your perimeter, at the exact moment you are compromised, it is never a coincidence. It is an operational trap. "How did you know I was here?" I asked. My voice was raspy, scraped raw by the freezing rain and sheer exhaustion, but the cadence was as hard as cold-rolled steel. I tightened my grip on Crew, shielding the boy from the piercing gaze of the woman standing by the open door. "We don't have time for this," Teresa said, pulling the rear passenger door wider. The blast of 74-degree climate-controlled air that escaped the cabin was an intoxicating yet dangerous invitation. "Get in, both of you, now." "I am asking you a direct question," I replied, forcing my aching knees to lock as I stood up. Despite the bitter protest of my chronic combat-induced arthritis, I squared my shoulders and assumed the rigid posture of a man still in uniform. I kicked my battered suitcase forward, positioning it between myself and the Escalade like a tactical obstacle. "How did you manage to pull up to this curb exactly 10 minutes after Saskia threw my things onto the porch? Who is feeding you intelligence?" Teresa crossed her arms, standing in the rain without bothering to hold an umbrella. The look she leveled at me was the exact same look she had used 20 years ago, calculating, clinical, scanning me, not as a human being, but as a balance sheet that needed to be balanced. 40 minutes ago, Saskia finalized the emergency filing to terminate your temporary residency under her legal status as the sole executor of Thane's estate. I have been parked 3 blocks away for the last 2 hours. Her voice was completely flat, monotone, like a court reporter reading a transcript. "Clifford, You can sit out here in the freezing November rain to satisfy your fragile military pride, or you can get your grandson out of the cold and listen to my answers. Crew whimpered against my neck, his tiny shoulders shaking violently beneath his soaked, razor-thin jacket. The boy didn't even know who this woman was. To Crew, his paternal grandmother was nothing more than a forbidden name, a ghost omitted from the bedtime stories I told him to keep his father's memory alive. I stared into Teresa's face, searching the features I used to wake up next to during our 8 years of marital warfare. Time had carved faint lines around her eyes, but it hadn't diminished the lethal corporate sharpness of her gaze. This was the same woman who had looked me in the eye 2 decades ago and told me our marriage was a non-performing asset that needed to be liquidated immediately. The sudden suffocating weight of those 20-year-old memories flooded back, crashing over me like the icy rainwater cascading down my spine. It was 2006 when I returned from my second deployment in Iraq. I brought back jagged fragments of shrapnel embedded in my left knee, severe night terrors that made me wake up screaming at the sound of distant sirens, and a mental manifest of 30 men who didn't make it back off the black tarmac. I needed a home governed by absolute unyielding structure. I needed a rigid military routine to keep my fractured mind from detonating under the pressure of untreated PTSD. For me, discipline was a matter of survival. But Teresa operated on a completely different frequency. She had just launched her first private equity fund in Midtown. To Teresa, the world was not governed by chain of command or archaic notions of loyalty. It was governed by liquidity, hidden clauses, and high-risk arbitrage. I remembered the exact night the final fracture occurred. Thane was 14, sitting at the far end of the mahogany dining table, his eyes wide with terror, as his parents tore the room apart with quiet, venomous words. I had discovered that Teresa had unilaterally liquidated Thane's entire college trust fund to dump it into a speculative offshore telecom venture, what she called a once-in-a-lifetime macroeconomic play. "You are gambling with our son's future," I had roared, slamming my fist onto the table so hard the china rattled. In my world, unauthorized diversion of allocated capital is called treason. Teresa hadn't even flinched. She simply lowered her gold-rimmed reading glasses and looked at me with a chilling, detached calm that made my bruise run cold. "This isn't your theater of war, Clifford, and you are not my commanding officer. Take that rigid cookie-cutter engineer mentality back to your barracks. In the real world, capital must be deployed aggressively, and I don't have the luxury of waiting for you to sign off on every dollar according to a manual written by cowards who are afraid of risk." That complete absence of empathy was what ultimately slaughtered us. When I needed a wife to hold me during the dark hours, when I woke up drenched in sweat, paralyzed by the auditory hallucinations of mortar fire, Teresa was at her desk drafting corporate bylaws. She viewed my psychological trauma as a sunk cost, an inefficient investment of her emotional time. To her corporate mind, a husband broken by war was a liability that yielded diminishing returns. She walked away, taking Thane with her, filing a divorce petition so structurally flawless, so meticulously insulated by legal traps that I couldn't find a single vulnerability to secure primary custody. She won that war without firing a single shot, using nothing but numbers and backdated legal maneuvers. And now, 20 years later, that same strategist was standing on a Buckhead sidewalk, controlling the perimeter of my downfall. 20 years of total estrangement, I growled, taking a long, deliberate stride toward her until the distance between us was less than a yard. I could smell her expensive French perfume cutting through the metallic ozone stench of the storm. 3 years I have spent living like an unpaid migrant worker in my own son's house. 3 years of kneeling on white marble, mopping up after the woman who stole my son's legacy. Where were you, Teresa? Were you flying business class to London? Were you managing shareholder expectations in New York? Why are you pulling up to this curb on the exact night she discards us? Teresa's eyes flickered, a momentary microscopic spark of rage, or perhaps old hurt flashed beneath her wet eyelashes before she reestablished her corporate mask. "Do you really think I haven't been watching you, Clifford?" she said softly, yet every word struck with cold precision. "Do you think I didn't notice the way you buried yourself in meaningless routines? Thane disappeared, and instead of following the inconsistencies, you chose to disappear, inside your own guilt. You let Saskia walk all over you because some part of you believed you deserved it for failing to keep our son safe." "Shut your mouth," I hissed, my chest heaving. I will not. Teresa took a half step forward, meeting my defensive perimeter directly. I remained silent for 3 years because I was waiting for you to activate. I thought the veteran who pulled men out of Fallujah would wake up the moment he saw his grandson being systematically isolated. But you didn't. You kept mopping the floors. Clifford, you played the role of the submissive house servant until tonight. The rain lashed violently between us, a physical barrier between two irreconcilable human philosophies. A soldier who lived by bruise and duty, and a corporate predator who lived by the long game. If you have been watching me for 3 years, I said, a wave of profound disgust washing over me. If you had the logistical capability to park an Escalade 3 blocks away and predict Saskia's timeline down to the minute, then you are complicit. You watched our son vanish. You watched his child be reduced to a prisoner, and you did absolutely nothing just to let some grand corporate strategy play out. You haven't changed, Teresa. You are still completely inhuman. Teresa drew a slow, deep breath through her nose, her chest rising against her overcoat. For the first time, I noticed the freezing rain was running directly into her eyes, forcing her to blink rapidly, breaking her sterile perfection. Information wins wars, Clifford. You taught me that when you wore the uniform, she said, her voice dropping back into its rhythmic, unshakable cadence. I have every single answer you're looking for, but I'm not going to catch pneumonia on a... What came next was Teresa's apartment on the 25th floor of a midtown high-rise that had no photographs. Not of Thane as a child, not of our wedding, not even of Crew. And that told me more about the last 20 years than any conversation we'd avoided having. She parked in the underground garage and led us through a lobby with marble floors and a night security guard who nodded at her like she was a regular. The elevator ride was silent, except for Crew's soft breathing against my shoulder. When the doors opened on the 25th floor, Teresa unlocked the only door in the hallway. The apartment was clean, expensive, completely impersonal, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city white walls, gray furniture that looked like it came from a catalog. No clutter, no warmth, no trace that anyone actually lived here. Where are the pictures? I asked. You used to keep them everywhere. Teresa set her keys in a bowl by the door. I learned not to get attached to things I can't control. She showed me to the guest room, white sheets, gray comforter, nothing on the walls. I laid Crew down still in his damp jacket because I didn't have dry clothes to change him into. He didn't wake up, just curled onto his side, thumb sliding into his mouth, like he used to do when he was 2. He'll sleep through till morning, Teresa said from the doorway. Come on. I followed her back to the living room. She went to the kitchen, opened concept chrome appliances, granite counters, and poured 2 glasses of water. Set one in front of me on the glass coffee table. Then she reached into her coat pocket and placed something next to the water glass. A thumb-sized black device. Looked like a USB drive, but with a tiny metal prong on one end. I've had this in Saskia's house for 3 years, Teresa said, sitting across from me. Every conversation, every phone call, every lie. I stared at the device. 3 years. You bugged my son's house. I bugged the woman who married my son, and then watched him disappear under suspicious circumstances, yes. Teresa's voice was flat. I installed it 2 weeks after the memorial service, behind the iron cactus on her living room windowsill. The iron cactus. I'd watered that plant for 3 years. You've been listening to me, I said slowly. Every day, mopping floors, watching Crew, sleeping in the room next to hers. Yes. And you didn't think to tell me no? Teresa leaned forward, her expression unchanged. Because for 3 years, you were a broken man playing housekeeper. You would have confronted her. You would have gotten yourself removed. So I waited. For what? For you to remember who you used to be. She picked up her phone from the table, or for Thane to make contact, whichever came first. She tapped the screen and turned it toward me. An audio file. Timestamp from last night, 11:47 p.m. Unknown number. Teresa pressed play. Static. A pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in 3 years. Mom, I'm in Asheville. Get Dad out of that house tonight. The file ended. 8 seconds total. I couldn't breathe. Play it again, I whispered. She did. Mom, I'm in Asheville. Get Dad out of that house tonight. My hands were shaking. Again. She played it 4 times. I listened to every syllable. Every breath a slight static in the background. The way he said Dad with the same cadence he'd used since he was 6 years old. 3 years. 3 years I'd mourned him while Teresa knew or suspected he might be alive. Tears ran down my face and I didn't bother wiping them away. It's him, I said. I know. He's alive. Yes. Where? Asheville. That's all I know. The call came from a burner, untraceable. 30 seconds after it ended, I got in my car and drove to Buckhead. Teresa set the phone down. He told me to get you out tonight, so I did. I pressed the heels of my palms against my eyes. My son was alive. Somewhere in Asheville, alive and free enough to make a phone call, which meant the plane crash 3 years ago, the Coast Guard search, the empty casket we'd buried, the memorial service with 200 people who'd said how sorry they were. All of it had been a lie. What happened to the plane? I don't know yet, Teresa said, but I know who paid for it. She stood and walked to a cabinet by the window, pulled out a folder, came back and spread papers across the coffee table. Bank statements, printed transaction records, dates and amounts in neat columns. $200,000, Teresa said, tapping one line highlighted in yellow. Saskia withdrew it from a joint account she and Thane shared, 14 days before the plane went down. I looked at the date, November 3rd, 3 years ago, 2 weeks before the crash. Where did it go? Teresa slid another page across the table. A deposit slip. The same amount, same date, different account. The name at the top made my bruise cold. Ronan Mercer, Virgil's son, Teresa said. Known enforcer. 3 arrests for assault, 1 for extortion, all charges dropped because witnesses disappeared. He works for people who need problems solved quietly. $200,000, the exact price my daughter-in-law put on my son's life. She hired him, I said. Yes. To eliminate Thane. Yes? I held the bank statement in my hands, Saskia's signature at the bottom, Ronan Mercer's name at the top. The paper felt thin, flimsy, like it shouldn't be able to prove something this monstrous. But it did. My daughter-in-law, the woman who'd smiled at me across the breakfast table this morning, who'd told me the floor wasn't clean enough, who'd thrown me out into the rain with her own son, had paid $200,000 to have my boy removed. And if Thane was alive, which meant the hit had failed, then someone had been holding him for 3 years, or hiding him, or using him. The question wasn't whether Saskia was guilty. The question was who else was in on it. I looked up at Teresa. Her face showed no satisfaction, no vindication, just grim certainty. You already know, I said. She nodded once. How many people, at minimum? Teresa gathered the papers back into a neat stack. 4, maybe 5. It's a network, Clifford, and Saskia's just the beginning. I didn't sleep, and judging by the cold coffee in Teresa's hand when the sun came up, neither had she, which meant we both knew the conversation we'd been avoiding for 20 years was about to happen, whether we wanted it or not. She'd spread more papers across the table after midnight. Names I didn't recognize, companies that didn't exist 3 years ago, money trails that looped through offshore accounts and shell corporations, a network of people who'd conspired to make my son disappear. But all I could think about was the surveillance device. 3 years. The iron cactus I'd watered every Thursday. When the first light hit the floor-to-ceiling windows, I stood and walked to the kitchen. Found Teresa already there, staring at her cold coffee like it held answers. You knew, I said quietly. For 3 years you knew he might be alive, and you let me... He asked me to trust him. Teresa didn't turn around. The same way you trusted him your whole life, Clifford. That's not... He called me 2 years ago. Not last night, 2 years ago. 1 phone call, 3 minutes. She finally looked at me. He said he was safe, that he had a plan, that I needed to watch you and wait. 2 years. You let me believe he was dead for 2 years after you knew. He needed you activated, not managing, not comfortable, activated. Teresa set her cup down with a sharp click. He said those exact words. I'm keeping Dad broken because I need him sharp when it matters. The words hit like a fist. I thought about the floors I'd mopped, the way I'd stopped questioning, stopped fighting, stopped being anything except a man waiting to die. So you watched, I said. Listened to recordings of me falling apart. Waited for the perfect moment to pull you out, yes. Teresa crossed her arms. Because our son asked me to trust that he knew what he was doing. Our son who's been hiding in Asheville for 3 years while his boy asks where Daddy went. Our son who's been building a case against the people who tried to eliminate him. Teresa's voice stayed level. And who needed his father to be desperate enough, angry enough, broken enough, to do what comes next. I wanted to put my fist through the granite counter. 30 years in the Army, 2 tours, and my own family had been running an operation on me. I didn't just know, Teresa said into the silence. I financed it. The Asheville house, the surveillance equipment, all of it. The world tilted. 3 years, Clifford. I've been funding our son's life while you mopped floors in his house. She didn't look away. He asked. I agreed. We both decided you couldn't know until the time was right. You and our son conspired to... Grandpa! We both turned. Crew stood in the hallway in his damp clothes. From last night, hair sticking up, eyes confused and worried. Why are you and Grandma yelling? She'd chosen our son over me. And the worst part, she'd been right to do it. I crossed to Crew and picked him up. We're not yelling, buddy, just talking loud. You hungry? Teresa opened the fridge without a word. Found eggs, bread, butter. Started cooking like this was a normal morning instead of the moment our broken family fell apart for the second time. I carried Crew to the living room and turned on the TV. Found cartoons. Settled him on the couch with a blanket Teresa pulled from somewhere. Stay here, okay, we'll bring you breakfast. Crew nodded, already watching the screen. I went back to the kitchen. Teresa had scrambled eggs going toast in the toaster. Domestic routine and a conversation about conspiracy and surveillance. I'm going back, I said. She didn't ask where. When today she thinks I'm broken, I'll use that. Saskia won't take you back after throwing you out. She will if she needs something. I leaned against the counter. You said you've been monitoring. What does she need? Teresa plated the eggs. Didn't answer right away. A knock on the door made us both turn. Teresa checked her phone, then went to answer it. Came back with a man I'd never seen. 30 fit the kind of controlled posture that said former military or current security. Caspian Sinclair, Teresa said. He's been watching the Buckhead house. Caspian? Sinclair, 30, was the kind of private security operative who reported facts without emotion, the kind Teresa had clearly been using to monitor my life while I mopped floors and buried my son. She's hosting business partners Friday night, Caspian said without preamble. 12 people, catered event. But her housekeeper quit 3 weeks ago and the temp agency can't fill the slot. Friday, 3 days from now. She's panicking, Caspian continued. Called 6 agencies this morning. No one available on short notice for a party that size. I looked at Teresa. I show up broken and apologetic. Beg for my job back. She needs me for Friday. It's a trap, Teresa said. Everything's a trap. I met her eyes. But Thane left something in that house. Something he wanted me to find. Otherwise, why have you planted a bug and watched me for 3 years? Teresa and Caspian exchanged a look. What? I asked. We don't know what he left, Teresa said slowly. Or where. The surveillance is audio only. We can't see what you see. 30 years in the army taught me that anger was a tool, not a reaction. You picked it up when you needed it and put it down when the mission required something else. I put it down. Thane and I used to play reconnaissance games when he was 10, I said. Dead drops behind loose wall panels, hollow stair rails, air vents with removable grills. Teresa's expression shifted. I taught him how to think tactically, how to hide things where people wouldn't look. I smiled without humor. I built that house 30 years ago, Teresa, with my own hands. Every secret compartment, every hidden space. And Thane knows them all, she said quietly. Every single one. I looked at Caspian. Tell her I'm coming. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I need the job. When Thane was 10, I'd thought I was just playing games with my son. I didn't know I was preparing him to hide evidence that would save his life 22 years later. Saskia had thrown me out thinking I was a broken old man with nowhere to go. She didn't know I knew every hidden corner of the house she thought was hers. And Thane knew I knew. The hardest part of going undercover isn't the lie, it's making your body believe it. And as I stood at that iron gate at 3 in the afternoon, with my head bowed and my shoulders slumped, I had to convince myself I was the broken man Saskia needed me to be. Caspian had called ahead, told her I was desperate, begging for work, nowhere else to go. I pressed the intercom button and waited. Her voice came through cold and crisp. Yes, it's me. I made my voice hoarse, defeated. I have nowhere else to go. Please, I'll do anything. Silence. I could picture her on the other end calculating. The business party was in 3 days. 12 guests. No housekeeper. The temp agencies had all said no. She needed me more than I needed her. But she couldn't know. I knew that. The gate buzzed and clicked open. Saskia stood in the doorway wearing cream slacks and a silk blouse, arms crossed, looking at me the way you'd look at a stray dog that had wandered back. You can stay, she said. You work for your space. You eat what I don't finish. And you don't go near that boy unless I'm watching. Crew. My grandson was somewhere in this house, and I wasn't allowed to see him without supervision. I kept my head down. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. The basement storage room has a cot. That's yours now. She stepped aside to let me in. Start with the kitchen. It's a disaster. I walked past her into the house that smelled like lemon cleaner and expensive coffee. The same white marble floors I'd mopped yesterday. The shelf where the vase had shattered, now empty. One more thing, Saskia said behind me. I'm having business associates here Friday night. Cocktails and appetizers. I expect perfection. Of course, she smiled. Not warmth, just satisfaction that I'd be exactly where she wanted me. She didn't know I'd already won. The afternoon crawled. I mopped the kitchen floor, then the hallway, then the dining room. When I finished, Saskia walked through with her heels clicking and pointed at streaks only she could see. Do it again. Yes, ma'am. I'd been a decorated soldier. I'd pulled men from burning vehicles. And I was standing here grateful that a 28-year-old woman let me sleep in her basement. But the humiliation was the point. She needed me broken, grateful, under control. So I played the part. At 6, I made her dinner. Grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, quinoa salad, served it on her white china while she sat at the dining room table scrolling through her phone. I stood beside the kitchen door while she ate. This is cold, she said without looking up. I'm sorry, just stand there. I'm not hungry anyway. She pushed the plate away, half finished. I cleared it while she went upstairs. I ate the leftovers standing over the sink, then washed the dishes. Dried them. Put them away exactly where they belonged. All while watching the clock. And watching Saskia? She came downstairs at 7 to check the locks. Went back up at 8, came down again at 9:30 to pour herself wine. At 10, she went to the second floor study Thane's old bedroom, the one she'd converted into her office, and I heard the lock click. At 10:30, the house went quiet, except for the soft hum of her white noise machine through the bedroom door. I had my window. I waited in the basement storage room until 11. Sat on the cot in the dark, counting seconds running through the plan. Lock picking. Infantry Soldiers Course Fort Leonard Wood, 1986. Before I'd specialized in demolition, they'd taught us how to get into places we didn't belong. Saskia thought locked doors meant security. She'd never served. At 11, I went upstairs in my socks. No shoes, no sound. The study door was solid oak with a standard pin tumbler lock. I pulled 2 paper clips from my pocket. I'd taken them from Saskia's desk drawer while cleaning and bent them into the shapes muscle memory remembered. 40 seconds, the lock clicked. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me. The room still smelled like Thane, or maybe I was imagining it. Teresa had redecorated after we divorced, new paint, new furniture, posters of bands I didn't recognize, but the bones were the same, including the wall panel behind the headboard. I moved the desk chair aside and knelt, ran my fingers along the baseboard until I found the seam. Pressed the bottom corner the way I'd taught Thane when he was 10. The panel popped loose. Behind it, in the hollow space between studs, sat a small tin box. Mission Drop Alpha 3. Thane was 10. I taught him this. 22 years between that first dead drop lesson and this moment. Thane had remembered every detail. I pulled the box out. It was light, small enough to fit in one hand. I opened it. Inside, a photograph and a folded piece of paper. The photograph showed Teresa and me on the courthouse steps in 1989, both of us in our 20s, here in a white dress she'd bought at a thrift store, me in my dress uniform. Our wedding day. 3 months before Thane was born. I unfolded the paper. 2 words in Thane's handwriting, fingerprint, not mine. I turned the photo frame over. Glued to the back, sealed in plastic, was a micro SD card, fingerprint, not mine, which meant Thane had locked whatever was on this card with biometric security. My fingerprint, not his. Saskia could have torn this house apart looking for evidence. Could have found this box, found this card, but she'd never be able to open it. Only I could. Thane had planned this down to the last detail. He'd known I'd come back. Known I'd remember the dead drops. Known I'd find what he'd left. Including knowing I'd be the only one who could open it. I sat there on the floor of my dead son's childhood bedroom, holding our family wedding photo and a piece of evidence that required my thumb to unlock. And I knew the way you know things in your gut before your brain catches up, that whatever was on this card was going to change everything. Fingerprint, not mine. Which meant he knew what was on. It would destroy me. I pressed my thumb to Teresa's phone sensor, the way Thane knew I would, and when the encrypted file opened, what appeared on the screen wasn't a goodbye letter or a confession. It was a blueprint for Financial Eliminate that my 34-year-old son had spent 3 years designing. I was still sitting on the floor of his bedroom at 11:30 at night, door locked, SD card connected to the burner phone Teresa had given me that morning. The screen showed architectural renderings, floor plans, financial projections, Green Meridian Medical Complex, Phase 1 $42 million, Phase 2 $78 million, Total project value 120 million. Alpharetta, Georgia. Mixed use development. Medical offices on the first 3 floors. Luxury residential units above. Parking structure. Retail space. Every detail rendered in clean lines and professional graphics. And everywhere throughout every page, every spreadsheet, every contract clause, red markers highlighting specific sections. I zoomed in on one. Revenue laundering trigger. Federal threshold exceeded. Another. RICO statute, 1962 chapter. Pattern of racketeering activity. Another. Shell company ownership chain. Automatic federal reporting required. This wasn't a real estate project. It was a federal bear trap disguised as the deal of the decade. My son, while I'd been mopping floors and sleeping in a basement, had designed a $120 million weapon. I scrolled through page after page. Construction timelines, vendor contracts, financing structures that looked legitimate on the surface, but contained clauses that would trigger automatic federal investigation the moment certain conditions were met. And those conditions all centered on one name, Virgil Mercer. The moment Virgil purchased controlling stake in Green Meridian, and according to the documents he'd already signed, a letter of intent, every financial transaction would auto-report to federal prosecutors. The RICO triggers would activate. His entire criminal empire would freeze instantly. Thane had built a mousetrap that looked like a mansion. I sat there reading my son's work and feeling something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Pride and horror. Because this was what Teresa meant when she said Thane got the cold part. From her, he turned his own disappearance into a federal operation. I copied the files to the phone's internal storage, deleted the connection log, and pocketed the SD card. Put the wall panel back exactly as I'd found it, moved the chair, checked the room for any sign I'd been there. Nothing. I unlocked the study door, slipped into the hallway, and listened. Saskia's white noise machine hummed through her bedroom door. No other sounds. I went downstairs in my socks, grabbed my jacket from the basement storage room, and walked out the back door into the November cold. The Escalade was parked 3 blocks away, where Caspian had left it. Keys under the floor mat. I drove through empty Atlanta streets toward Midtown, arrived at Teresa's building at 1 in the morning. She was waiting in the kitchen with coffee already made. "You found it," she said, not a question. I pulled out the phone and handed it to her. She scrolled through the files without expression. No surprise, no shock, just the cold efficiency of someone who'd already known what was there. "He showed you," I said, 2 years ago, before he went dark. Teresa zoomed in on a contract clause. "It's not just real estate. It's a RICO trap disguised as the deal of the decade." "How long has he been planning this?" 2 years with the FBI. 3 years total, if you count the kidnapping. She set the phone down. Saskia and Virgil thought they were eliminating a threat. They created an undercover federal operative instead. I sat down at her kitchen table. The coffee was black and strong, and I drank it without tasting it. "Virgil's already signed the letter of intent," I said. "I know. So why hasn't he been arrested?" "Because signing intent isn't the same as taking possession. The triggers activate when he assumes legal ownership, when the money transfers, when he makes it official." Teresa pulled up a document. "That happens in 11 days. 11 days until Virgil walked into Thane's trap. What kind of son builds a $120 million snare, gets himself kidnapped for 3 years, and lets his father suffer all to ensure the trap springs perfectly? Mine, apparently." "There's a problem," Teresa said. "Of course there was. This is beautiful," she continued, gesturing at the screen. "But it's not evidence. It's a copy." I looked at her. "What?" "The SD card is a duplicate, a map for you to understand the plan. But the original hard drive, the one with actual FBI communications, recorded transactions, with Virgil, proof of Saskia's payments, to Ronan, timestamps documenting the conspiracy that's still at the house. Where, if I knew that, I would have gotten it myself 3 years ago." Teresa met my eyes. "Thane hid it somewhere, somewhere even the surveillance couldn't help me find. And without it, we have a theory and no way to prove it." I thought about the dead drop, the tin box, the wedding photo. Thane had left me a map to understand what he'd built, but not the actual weapon. "He knew I'd have to go back," I said. "Yes, knew I'd have to search without knowing what I was looking for." "Probably." I stood and walked to the window. 25 floors down, Atlanta spread out in streetlights and shadows. My son was alive, somewhere in Asheville, and he'd spent 3 years building a trap that required his father to find the final piece. The SD card showed me the what and the how, but the original hard drive held the who and the when, Recorded conversations documented, payments timestamps. Without that drive, we had a beautiful theory and no proof. And it was sitting somewhere in that house, in a hiding place Thane hadn't told me about, which meant either he'd run out of time to leave more clues, or he was testing whether I was smart enough to find it on my own. I was about to find out which. I walked into the office building where my son had worked for 8 years, thinking I'd find answers in his files. But the man blocking the elevator bank had answers of a different kind, the kind that came from selling information to the people who wanted Thane dead. It was 10 in the morning on day 3. I'd slept 2 hours at Teresa's apartment, showered, changed into clothes that didn't smell like basement storage, and driven to the glass tower in Midtown where Thane had run his medical technology consulting firm. The lobby was all marble and chrome. Security desk by the elevators. Directory board listing companies by floor. Garrison Medical Consulting, 12th floor. Except my son had been dead for 3 years and the company name was probably different now. Dwight Halstead, 48 building security chief, sat behind his desk with the kind of contempt that only came from knowing he'd sold someone out and gotten away with it. Help you, he said. Not a question. A dismissal waiting to happen. I'm here to collect my son's personal effects, I said. Thane Garrison, 12th floor. Dwight looked at me like I'd asked him to commit a felony. No authorization on file, he said. You'll need written permission from Mrs. Garrison. I am Mr. Garrison, the Mrs. Garrison who owns the company now. He turned back to his computer screen. Take it up with her. The hostility wasn't professional. It was personal. Like he knew exactly who I was and wanted me to know I had no power here. My son died 3 years ago, I said quietly. I'm his next of kin. I have a legal right to. You have the right to get written authorization from the legal owner. Dwight smiled without warmth. Or leave, your choice. I stood there looking at this man who was enjoying turning me away. Something about the way he said it, the satisfaction in his voice. He'd been waiting for this moment. I glanced down at his desk. Standard security setup, computer monitor, radio, coffee cup, clipboard with sign-in logs, and there in the margins of the visitor log sheet, clipped to the top, names and times written in blue pen. I leaned forward slightly, reading upside down the way I'd learned in intelligence briefings. Ronan Mercer, April 15th, 3 years ago, 2 o'clock to 2:45 p.m. Ronan Mercer, April 22nd, 9:30 to 10:15 a.m. Ronan Mercer, May 6th, 1:15 to 2 p.m. May 20th, June 3rd, June 17th. Every 2 weeks, same name. Visitors signed in to see Thane's floor, all during business hours when Thane would have been in the building, all written in Dwight's handwriting. You kept very detailed logs, Mr. Halstead, I said. His expression changed just a flicker, wariness replacing contempt. That's my job. Must be, I straightened. Logging every visitor, writing down exactly when they arrive and leave. Very thorough. Now leave, Dwight said, before I call the real police. 6 months. They'd been watching him for half a year before they moved. I walked out of the building and sat in the Escalade for 10 minutes, just breathing. Dwight wasn't just some corrupt security guard who'd taken a bribe. He'd been the surveillance point, the one tracking Thane's movements, documenting his schedule, reporting to Ronan every detail needed to plan the hit. And he was still here, still working, still getting away with it. I pulled out the burner phone and called Teresa. She answered on the first ring. What happened? Dwight Townsend, building security. He was logging Ronan's visit 6 months before Thane disappeared. I know, Teresa said. I've had Caspian watching him for a year. He's compromised. We just don't have proof that would hold up in court. Of course she'd been watching him. There's something else, Teresa continued. I got information from a legal source this morning. Carlton Phelps, the estate attorney, forged power of attorney documents and property transfer deeds 2 weeks before Thane's disappearance. All of it. Company shares, property rights, liquid assets, everything transferred to Saskia with backdated signatures and notarizations. The documents are legally binding as long as no one contests them. And with Thane dead, no one can. Teresa's voice was flat. Saskia owns everything legally. The forgery worked. I sat there processing. Then she already owned the company legally, I said slowly, before the plane crash. So why pay Ronan $200,000 to... I stopped. Teresa let the silence stretch. What could a man own that a forged signature couldn't steal, but a bullet could? Because there's something a forged will can't give her, Teresa said quietly. Something only Thane's death could. The hard drive. Or what's on it. Evidence of something she needed buried permanently. Something that would survive a legal transfer, but not a corpse. I thought about the Green Meridian files. the RICO trap, the FBI partnership. If Saskia legally owned the company through forgery, she could sell it, dissolve it, do whatever she wanted with the assets. But she couldn't erase what Thane knew, couldn't delete evidence he'd already gathered, couldn't stop him from testifying, unless he was dead. She needed him silent, I said, permanently. And the hard drive is whatever he was going to use against her, whatever made him dangerous, even after she'd stolen everything else. Teresa paused. It's not just evidence, Clifford. It's leverage. And if you find it before she does, you'll have the same leverage Thane had. Which explained why Saskia had been so careful about letting me back into the house, why Dwight had been so hostile, why everyone connected to this conspiracy was still watching, still waiting. Because the forged will gave Saskia the company, the house, the bank accounts, everything a widow would legally inherit anyway. But she'd paid $200,000 to have my son removed, which meant the will wasn't enough. Thane had something that couldn't be forged, couldn't be stolen, couldn't be transferred by paperwork, something that died with him, or something he'd hidden so well that only his death would stop him from ever using it. The original hard drive wasn't just evidence, it was leverage, and Saskia was terrified I'd find it. Children tell the truth when they're half asleep. Something about the space between dreaming and waking strips away the filters adults teach them, which is why when Crew mumbled about Daddy hiding something in the cactus, I knew it wasn't a dream, but a memory he'd been carrying for 3 years. It was 11 at night. Day 3. I was sitting beside Crew's bed at Teresa's apartment, watching him sleep the way I used to when he was an infant, and Thane would bring him over for weekends. The boy stirred, rolled onto his side. His eyes stayed closed, but his mouth moved. Daddy put something in Mr. Cactus, he whispered. Said it's secret for Grandpa. I froze. What did Daddy say, buddy? But Crew had already slipped back under thumb, sliding into his mouth, breathing deep and even. Mr. Cactus, the iron cactus Thane had made in high school welding class. Birthday present for me when he was 16. Ugly as hell, 3 feet tall, made from welded rebar and sheet metal painted desert green. But Thane had been so proud of it. I'd kept it on my desk for years. Then after Teresa and I divorced, it ended up at Thane's house, still sitting on Saskia's living room windowsill. I'd watered the real plants around it for 3 years. Mr. Cactus, Daddy put something in it. And then the second memory hit me like a fist. 3 years ago, October, 2 months before Thane disappeared. I'd been suspicious. Thane coming home late, evasive answers about work, meetings he wouldn't explain. I'd thought what affair drugs, I couldn't even remember the specifics now. But I remembered what I'd done. I'd installed a GPS tracking chip inside the iron cactus, slipped it into the hollow base through the drainage hole. Military-grade tracker, the kind we'd used in Iraq to monitor vehicle movements. I'd wanted to see where Thane was going. Then 3 days later, I'd had the worst PTSD episode of my life. 48 hours I couldn't account for. Teresa found me in a hotel room in Alabama with no memory of how I'd gotten there. After that, I'd spent 2 months in therapy, put the suspicions away, decided I'd been paranoid, and I'd completely forgotten about the tracker. But it was still there, in the cactus. Battery good for 5 years. I'd suspected my own son of something what I couldn't even remember now, and I'd bugged him like an enemy combatant. And now Thane had hidden evidence in the same place. Because he knew. Somehow he knew about the tracker. Had found it, understood what it meant, and he'd used it. I called Teresa. The iron cactus, I said when she answered. On Saskia's windowsill, that's where he hid it. How do you know? Crew just told me, and I put a tracker in it 3 years ago. Silence on the other end. You what? I'll explain later. We need to get it. Tomorrow. Teresa was quiet for 5 seconds. Then I'll have Caspian set up a distraction. Morning came too fast. Caspian created the plan. Simple. Effective. He'd stage a delivery dispute at the front gate at 9 a.m. when Saskia was scheduled to leave for her 11 o'clock meeting. Loud enough to draw her attention. Long enough for me to slip in through the back door I'd left unlocked the night before. 20 minutes. Get the cactus. Search for anything else Thane might have hidden. Get out. I waited in the Escalade 3 blocks away. Radio earpiece. In watching Caspian's van pull up to the gate at exactly 9. Package for garrison residents, Caspian's voice came through. Signature required. I heard Saskia's reply through his mic. Irritation. She was running late. I moved. Back door still unlocked. I was inside in 15 seconds. The house smelled like coffee and that lemon cleaner Saskia loved. Empty. Silent except for Caspian's voice at the front gate arguing about delivery protocols. I crossed through the kitchen toward the living room. The cactus sat on the windowsill, exactly where it had always been, ugly welded metal catching the morning sun, 15 feet away. Clifford, abort. Teresa's voice in my ear, sharp, urgent. Saskia just canceled her 11 o'clock. She's coming back. I was halfway across the living room when I heard it. The front door opening, heels clicking on marble, Saskia's voice on her phone. No, I told you Friday. Everything has to be ready by Friday. I spun toward the back door. It clicked. Automatic lock. Timer I didn't know about. I grabbed the handle. Locked solid. Caspian, keep her talking, Teresa said through the radio, but Saskia's voice was already in the hallway. Close. Getting closer. I don't care what he said. The party is Friday, and I need confirmation today. Her footsteps headed toward the stairs. Toward me. I stood in the middle of her living room, the cactus 15 feet away on the windowsill, the back door locked, the front entry where she'd just come in. Plan A was dead. I was inside. The back door was locked, and Saskia was walking toward the stairs. I couldn't move without her hearing me, couldn't speak into the radio without revealing my position, couldn't reach the cactus without crossing in front of the hallway where she'd see me. Saskia's footsteps paused at the bottom of the stairs. Did I lock the back door this morning? She said to herself. I had 30 seconds to become invisible. The cactus sat on the windowsill, backlit by morning sun, holding 3 years of secrets, mine and Thane's both. Saskia's heels clicked on the marble stairs, one step at a time, unhurried. She was coming to the second floor, where I stood. My radio stayed silent. Caspian and Teresa couldn't help me now without exposing the whole operation. 30 years of combat training narrowed to one question: hide or fight. I chose the third option. I was lying under my daughter-in-law's desk with my hand on the hard drive that could prove she'd paid to have my son removed, when the window exploded inward and the man she'd hired to do it came through with a weapon. The third option wasn't hide or fight. It was move. When Saskia's heels hit the bottom stair, I'd crossed the living room in 4 silent steps and slipped into her office, the converted bedroom where Thane used to sleep now, full of filing cabinets and a glass desk and everything Saskia needed to run the company she'd stolen. I dove under that desk the second before she walked in. She sat down. Her feet landed 12 inches from my face. Black heels, cream slacks. I could smell her perfume, something expensive and sharp. The phone was already at her ear. I told you everything has to be perfect Friday, she said. The investors are coming at 7. Virgil promised me this would be seamless. Virgil? She was talking to Virgil Mercer. I lay perfectly still, breathing through my nose, trying not to shift my weight on the hardwood floor. 60 years old? Decorated veteran, lying under a desk like a child hiding from punishment. My hand moved in the darkness beneath the desk, feeling along the underside. Wood grain, nothing, nothing. Then, plastic, taped to the wood. Small, rectangular, the size and shape of an external hard drive. Not under Thane's old desk, under hers. She'd kept it close, right where she could reach it every day. The evidence of her crime within arm's reach at all times. Paranoia disguised as control. No, I don't care what he thinks, Saskia said into the phone. You promised me 200,000 would make this go away. It didn't, so now we do it your way. I touched the hard drive, felt the tape holding it in place. If I pulled it free, she'd hear the rip. If I didn't, I'd have to lie here until she left. And I had no idea how long that would be. The window exploded. Glass shattered inward with the sound of a car crash. Cold November air rushed in. Saskia screamed. A man came through the broken window in one smooth motion. Ronan Mercer, 35, with a professional's efficiency and a sidearm that had seen recent deployment. It took me 3 seconds to recognize him as the 19-year-old Marine I'd pulled from a collapsing structure in Fallujah 20 years ago. Where's the USB? Ronan said, his weapon trained directly on Saskia. The real drive. I know you have it. Saskia pushed back from the desk. Who the hell? There's a man under my desk. I rolled out, not toward the door, not toward safety, toward the hard drive. I reached up, grabbed it, ripped it free from the tape with one violent pull. Ronan's weapon swung toward me. Don't, he stopped, stared. Wait, Sterling, Arthur, Sterling. I stood slowly, hard drive in my left hand. Right hand, visible, empty. In Fallujah, we'd used call signs instead of real names. I'd been Sterling, he'd been Vance. Marcus Vance? I said. The man who came to eliminate my daughter-in-law was the boy I'd saved from dying in a war neither of us understood. Ronan's expression went through 3 stages. Shock, recognition, something that looked like grief. You pulled me out of that building in Fallujah, he said. 2004, 2nd Platoon, mortar attack brought the whole east wall down. I was trapped under the rubble and you... He stopped, looked at the hard drive in my hand, at Saskia behind the desk. What are you doing here? Visiting family, I said. He's stealing from me. Saskia found her voice. He broke into my house and... Ronan Mercer, I said, cutting her off. You were Marcus Vance then, 19 years old. I pulled you out 30 seconds before the secondary explosion. Ronan hadn't lowered his stance. But it wasn't pointed at me anymore. It hung at his side heavy, like he'd forgotten he was holding it. I've been looking for you for 20 years, he said quietly. Tried to find you through the Corps. They said you'd retired. No forwarding. I didn't want to be found. You saved my life. You were a kid. Saskia looked between us. What is this you two know each other? Ronan ignored her. His eyes stayed on me, on the hard drive. What's on it? He asked. Proof, I said. He nodded once, like that was all the explanation he needed. Then he looked at Saskia. This is Arthur Sterling. He pulled me out of a burning building in Fallujah when I was 19. I've owed him a life debt for 20 years. I don't care about your... The debt's paid. Ronan stepped aside, away from the door, away from the window, giving me a clear path to either exit. 10 seconds. We're even. After that, we're not. I moved. Didn't thank him. Didn't acknowledge Saskia screaming behind me. Just ran the way the combat engineer I used to be had learned to run, when explosions meant you had seconds, not minutes. I hit the hallway at a sprint. Behind me, Ronan's voice. Your father-in-law just signed his downfall. Tell Virgil the old man has the drive. Saskia's voice sharp and cold. I'm calling him right now. I took the stairs 3 at a time. The front door was unlocked. She'd come in that way, hadn't locked it behind her. I burst through into cold November air. Caspian's Escalade was 3 houses down, engine running. I ran, got the door open, threw myself into the passenger seat. Go, I said. Caspian didn't ask questions. Just pulled away from the curb, smooth and fast. Not fast enough to attract attention, but fast enough to matter. I sat there breathing hard drive clutched in my right hand. I'd gotten it. The evidence Thane had hidden. The proof Saskia had paid to have my son removed. But the iron cactus? Mr. Cactus, with its GPS chip and whatever else Thane had hidden inside, still sat on Saskia's windowsill. And I'd just told Virgil Mercer exactly what I had. Saskia was calling Virgil before I hit the front door. Caspian drove 3 blocks before I could breathe again. The hard drive sat in my lap like a live grenade, and I knew the way you know things when survival instinct overrides thought, that Saskia hadn't let me take it. She'd made me think I'd won. Pull over, I said. Caspian glanced at me. We need to... Pull over. Now! He turned into a parking lot behind a closed grocery store. Removed the engine. I pulled out the laptop Teresa had given me that morning. Opened it. Plugged in the hard drive. The screen lit up. File directory loading. Then, error. File corrupted. Error. File corrupted. Error, error, error. The screen flooded red. Binary code scrolling faster than I could read. The laptop fan started whirring frantically, spinning up like it was trying to cool something burning inside. I watched 3 years of evidence delete itself in real time. Cascading failures. One folder after another. Green Meridian files. FBI communications. Saskia's bank transfers. Ronan's contracts. All of it turning to corrupted data, unusable garbage. The virus didn't even try to hide what it was doing. It wanted me to watch. 30 seconds. That's how long it took to wipe everything. The screen went black. Then a single line of text appeared. You were never supposed to keep it. I sat there staring at the message. Saskia hadn't been surprised when I grabbed the drive. She hadn't tried to stop me. She wanted me to take it. Wanted me to run. Wanted me to plug it into a safe computer where the hidden program would erase everything on its own. And I'd done exactly what she'd planned. How many times can a man be outsmarted before he stops calling it luck and starts calling it what it is? Tactical failure. It's gone, I said. Caspian looked at the blank screen. All of it? She baited me. The whole thing was a trap. I wanted to put my fist through something. Through the dashboard. Through the laptop. Blaming my own mind for being stupid enough to think I'd outplayed her. But anger was useless. I closed the laptop. Put the dead drive in my pocket. Take me to Midtown, I said. The cafe on Peachtree. I need to meet someone. Brent Thornton was already there when I walked in 2 hours later. He sat at a corner table with his back to the wall. Coffee in front of him going cold, watching the door the way men in his profession learn to watch doors. Brent Thornton sat across from me with the patient stillness of a man who'd spent 20 years on stakeouts. His graying beard and weathered hands marking him as someone who'd earned his cynicism the hard way. I sat down without being invited. You've been following me, I said. He didn't deny it. Just pushed a worn notebook across the table. Dates, times, locations. 3 weeks of my movements documented in precise handwriting. Saskia hired me, Brent said. 3 weeks ago. 5,000 to track you and report everything you did. And and I took her money. He opened the notebook. But I've been reporting to someone else too. I looked at the pages. My trips to Teresa's apartment, the office building, the times I'd left the Buckhead house. But not everything. The dead drop in Thane's room wasn't there. The surveillance device in the iron cactus wasn't mentioned. Teresa, I said. She asked me to watch over your family years ago, before you and she divorced. She knew your son was in trouble, knew he'd need protection. Brent closed the notebook. She contacted me through Veterans Support Network, said if anything happened to her, I should keep an eye on things. So you're double agent? Saskia thinks I'm hers, but I've been feeding her edited reports while telling Teresa everything that matters. He met my eyes. I knew Teresa, your late wife. She was a good woman, smart, the kind who saw 3 moves ahead. Teresa had known even then that Thane was slipping away from us. Why tell me now? Because you just grabbed a virus-trapped hard drive and lost everything Thane hid. And because someone else wants to talk to you. Brent nodded toward the cafe entrance. She's been waiting for the right moment. Carmela Mercer arrived with the brisk efficiency of a woman who billed by the hour her tailored blazer and leather portfolio announcing forensic accountant before she'd even shaken my hand. She sat down without ceremony, opened the portfolio, spread financial documents across the table like a dealer laying out cards. Carmela Mercer, she said, Virgil's daughter. And before you ask, yes, I know what he did. I've been documenting it for 3 years. I looked at the spreadsheets, bank transfers, shell company formations, money moving through accounts designed to hide its origin. Your father embezzled from my mother's estate, Carmela said. $340,000. Funneled it through companies that don't exist. Some of it ended up in Saskia's accounts. She pointed to a highlighted transfer, November 1st, 3 years ago. 40,000 from my father's shell company to Saskia's personal account, labeled consulting fee, 2 weeks before Thane disappeared. I've been building a case, Carmela continued. Federal charges, RICO violations, but I needed someone else who wanted him gone as much as I did. She looked at me. I heard you just lost the hard drive. The real evidence, the FBI files. Word traveled fast. Thane warned you about me, I said. Said you were dangerous. Thane never said that. My father did. Planted the rumor. Wanted to isolate his enemies from each other. Carmela slid a ledger across the table. I'm not your enemy. I'm the daughter who wants her father in prison, and you're the father who wants justice for his son. What are you proposing? Alliance. Your knowledge of the conspiracy. My financial evidence. We combine forces. I looked at the documents. 3 years of forensic accounting. Proof that Virgil had been stealing and laundering for longer than anyone knew. Brent's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. His expression changed. Text from my Saskia contact, he said quietly. 3 words. He turned the phone so I could see. She knows. Move now. The cafe window exploded inward. The virus that wiped the hard drive wasn't random. It had a signature, and Brent recognized it. We'd escaped the cafe through the back exit. Before whoever threw the explosive came through the shattered window, Carmela had grabbed her portfolio. Brent had grabbed me. We'd piled into Caspian's Escalade and driven to Teresa's apartment with our ears still ringing. Now it was night. Day 4 bleeding into day 5. Brent sat at Teresa's desk with the dead hard drive connected to a forensic analysis laptop running code I didn't understand. This encryption pattern, he said, not looking up from the screen, it's Raymond's work. Raymond Voss. He built virus traps for corporate espionage back in the 90s. Signatures unmistakable. Who's Raymond? Tech specialist. Worked Black Ops for a while. Now he freelances. Very expensive. Very good. Brent pointed at a string of code. This wasn't just a wipe. It was a precision trap designed to trigger the moment you tried to access the files. Saskia paid top dollar for this. I looked at the dead drive. So everything's gone? Everything on this drive, yes. Brent closed the laptop. Which means this was a decoy. Teresa, standing by the window, turned. Explain. If Saskia went to the trouble of planting a Raymond Voss virus trap, she wanted to make sure whatever Clifford grabbed would self-destruct. But you don't build a trap that's sophisticated unless you're protecting something real. Brent looked at me. The actual hard drive, the one with evidence that matters, is still hidden. Somewhere she thinks you'll never find it. The iron cactus. Mr. Cactus sitting on her windowsill. Where crew said Daddy hid something. Where Teresa's surveillance bug had been recording for 3 years. I know where it is, I said. Where? The iron cactus. The welded sculpture Thane made. It's hollow inside. I pulled out my phone, and I put a GPS tracker in the ceramic pot 3 years ago. Military grade. Battery lasts 5 years. Brent stared at me. You've had a tracker on it this whole time. I forgot about it. PTSD episode erased 2 months of my memory, but it's still there, still active. Can you access it? I pulled up the tracking app I hadn't opened in 3 years. Logged in with credentials, muscle memory remembered. The map loaded. One green dot. Buckhead, Saskia's address, still there, sitting on the windowsill where it had always been. If she moves it, I said, we'll know within 30 seconds. Teresa crossed to look at the screen. So we wait. Monitor the tracker. When she moves the cactus. We move faster, I finished. My phone rang. Unknown number. Atlanta area code. I answered. Mr. Garrison? The voice was female, older cultured. My name is Bernice Bentley. I'm Saskia's mother, and I believe we can help each other. I put the call on speaker. Bernice Bentley's voice came through the phone with the clipped precision of a woman who'd spent decades managing country club committees, but underneath I heard the tremor of someone who just realized her daughter might eliminate her. Why would you call me? I asked. Because my daughter doesn't leave loose ends, Mr. Garrison. I've seen how she looks at me lately, the same way she looked at your son before he disappeared. Teresa leaned closer to the phone. You're her mother, I said. You expect me to believe you didn't know? I knew she was cruel, calculating, good at getting what she wanted. Bernice's voice wavered. I didn't know she was capable of erasing her own husband, of paying $200,000 to make a man vanish. How do you measure betrayal, by bruise, relation, or by body count? What do you want? I asked. Friday night. She's hosting a business party. 18 guests, investors for the Green Meridian project. The party starts at 7. Green Meridian, the Rico trap Thane had built. Why tell me this? Because I want immunity. I want your testimony in writing, witnessed by attorneys, that I had no knowledge of any eliminate plot, that I was an uninformed bystander. And in exchange, guest list, security codes, the password to override the house system. Bernice paused. And timing. Saskia will be occupied with guests from 7 to 9:30. The study will be empty. The cactus will be unguarded. I looked at Teresa. She nodded slowly. How do I know this isn't a trap? I asked. You don't. But I'm 72 years old, Mr. Garrison. I've watched my daughter become something I don't recognize. And I've realized that when this is over, when she has everything she wants, I'm the only person who can testify about what she said to me in private, about what she planned. Even Saskia's own mother knew she was a threat. The security code, Bernice said, 7492, overrides all locks for 60 seconds. Guest list is 18 people, all documented. I'm emailing it to the number you're calling from. My phone buzzed. Email attachment, PDF with names, titles, companies. 18 investors. All real. All verifiable. Why should I trust you? I asked. Because I'm terrified, Bernice said simply. And terror makes people honest. She hung up. I looked at the email, the guest list, the security code. Brent pulled out his laptop. I can verify these names in 20 minutes. Do it, Teresa said. I stared at the phone. Bernice's information was too detailed, too precise. The Friday party, the 18 guests. The security override code 7492. Either she was genuine a mother, betraying her daughter to save herself, or Saskia had sent the perfect bait. Either way, Friday night was my only shot at the iron cactus. I didn't trust Bernice, but I needed her information to be accurate. Brent typed 7492 into the keypad, and the security room door clicked open. 24 hours after Bernice's call, we were testing whether her information was real or bait. Brent had driven to the office building downtown, the same one where Dwight worked security, where Thane had kept his consulting firm on the 12th floor. The security room was in the basement. Monitors, hard drives, 3 years of archived footage. I waited in the Escalade 3 blocks away, phone pressed to my ear. Password worked, Brent said. I'm in? Any guards? 1. Bathroom break. I've got maybe 10 minutes. I heard clicking, keyboard, mouse, the hum of computer fans. Iron cactus is visible on camera 3, Brent said. Living room windowsill, right where you said. Any movement on it? None, but Clifford, he stopped. What? There's a calendar system built into the security software. Events logged by date and time. More clicking. There's an entry for tonight, Friday, 9 p.m., labeled Tea Meeting Private. Tea meeting? Thane meeting? She's meeting him, I said. Tonight, while the party runs. That's what it looks like. Brent's voice was tight. And there's more. Archives going back 3 years. Let me pull up. Silence. Just breathing and the sound of files loading. Jesus, Brent said quietly. What? Encrypted email logs. Dwight Halstead. He's the building security chief here. He's been sending weekly reports every Tuesday for 3 years. Subject line weekly status. Reports to who? An encrypted account. But the signature matches communications we've intercepted from Ronan's network. Dwight Halstead appeared on the archive's security footage as a balding man in his 40s. Thane's former AA sponsor, who'd been feeding Thane's daily schedule to Ronan via encrypted emails every Tuesday for 3 years. 3 years. Thane had been watched for 3 years. From the moment he'd started planning whatever trap he'd built, someone had been documenting his movements, reporting to Ronan, to Saskia, to Virgil. My son had been operating under surveillance the entire time. Download everything you can, I said, and then get out. Already on it, Brent said. But Clifford tonight's your window. If she's meeting Thane at 9 and the party starts at 7, that's your shot at the cactus. I know. Bernice's information was accurate, down to the security code, down to the calendar entry, which meant either Bernice was genuine or Saskia was very, very good at bait. Before I tell you what those two signals revealed, are you still with me? Comment. A, if you think I should go after Thane first, or B, if I should search the basement and add one short reason why. Please note what follows contains some recreated details for narrative purposes. Friday night, 7 p.m. I stood outside the Buckhead house wearing the same clothes I'd worn when I'd mopped these floors. 18 guests arriving in German cars and designer suits. The kind of people who invested in $120 million medical complexes. The kind of people Thane had built his trap for. I used the service entrance, code 7492. The door opened. Inside the house smelled like catered food and expensive wine. Voices from the living room. Saskia's laugh, bright and false. I moved through the kitchen, past the hallway, into the living room where 18 people stood holding glasses and talking about Green Meridian like it was the opportunity of the decade. The iron cactus sat on the windowsill exactly where it had always been. Mr. Cactus. 3 feet of welded rebar and sheet metal, ugly as hell, holding secrets in its hollow base. I crossed to it, pulled out the lighter I'd brought. The instructions Thane had left in the wedding photo had been specific: heat the base. The GPS chip activates at 110 degrees. I flicked the lighter, held the flame under the ceramic pot. 10 seconds, 15. The ceramic turned warm, then hot. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The tracking app I'd opened 24 hours ago for the first time in 3 years. 2 green dots appeared on the map. One in Asheville, North Carolina, 53 miles north. Thane. The other. I stared at the screen. The other signal came from this address. This house. But not from the cactus. From below. 30 feet below where I stood. A basement that wasn't on any blueprint I'd ever seen. For the first time since Teresa's funeral, I felt the tactical edge shift in my favor. The GPS chip had been more sophisticated than I'd remembered. Not just one transmitter. 2. One in the cactus-based tracking location. One hidden in something Thane had placed inside the cactus before welding it shut. The hard drive. And he'd moved it. Moved it to a basement Saskia had built in secret. A place she thought was secure. A place I'd never find. But Thane had known I'd activate the GPS. Had known I'd see both signals. Had known I'd understand. 2 signals glowed on my phone screen. Thane, 50 miles north in Asheville, probably in the safe house Teresa had been financing for 3 years. The hard drive 30 feet below where I stood in a basement that didn't exist on paper. Saskia had built it in secret, hidden it from building permits, from inspectors, from anyone who might ask questions. But she hadn't hidden it from the GPS chip my son had planted. 2 signals. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like winning. The basement stairs descended into darkness that smelled like concrete, and secrets Saskia thought she'd buried. Brent had found the access point behind a false panel in the laundry room. Clever work the kind Thane would have appreciated. The GPS signal placed him directly below where I now stood, but the stairs led somewhere else entirely. Somewhere Saskia built after the wedding, probably while Thane was traveling for Green Meridian. My phone's flashlight caught raw cinder-block walls and exposed ductwork. The air tasted metallic underground like bunkers I'd cleared in Fallujah, where insurgents stored things they couldn't afford to lose. 15 steps down, the space opened into a room maybe 12 by 12 empty, except for a workbench covered in sawdust and a section of brick wall that didn't match the rest. Thane had installed that wall himself. I recognized his mortarwork neat corners, consistent depth, the kind of precision he brought to everything he touched. He'd learned the trade one summer in college, said working with his hands helped him think through problems his spreadsheets couldn't solve. I ran my fingers along the seams until I found what he'd left me. One brick loose. Behind it sat a pelican case, the kind that survives floods and fire, and evidence rooms. Inside, a 2 terabyte drive with a yellow evidence tag the original Thane had copied before hiding the duplicate in the wedding photo frame. Real project files this time. Real transactions showing money flowing through shell companies I recognized from Teresa's surveillance photos. Real contracts with Ronan's signature next to Saskia's, dated 6 months before Thane vanished. And an audio file labeled November 4th, 2024. 2 weeks before Thane disappeared, I plugged in earbuds and pressed play, my back against the cold cinder block. Saskia's voice came through crystal clear. No background noise, professional recording quality. We have 2 weeks to make this seamless. Owen trusts you, Virgil. He trusts you more. A man's voice, older, careful, the kind of calculated tone lawyers use when they're committing crimes they've already researched the penalties for. Virgil Mercer. I'd seen his name on Teresa's surveillance photos. Carmela's father, the financial consultant Saskia had brought into the conspiracy from the beginning. That's why this works. You're the grieving wife. I'm just the accountant who couldn't stop a determined young man from making bad choices. Ronan says the extraction team is ready. Thane gets comfortable somewhere warm, we get the project, and Thane gets what he deserves for thinking he still matters. What about the father, Clifford? Saskia laughed, cold and sharp enough to cut glass. He'll do what he always does, grieve quietly and stay out of the way. He's been irrelevant since Teresa left him. The recording clicked off at exactly 2 minutes, 17 seconds. I played it twice more, memorizing every inflection, every pause, every piece of evidence that would hold up in court. Premeditated, conspiracy, wire fraud. My son hadn't run from danger or made mistakes. He'd been packaged and shipped like cargo, while his wife cashed in on his disappearance and called it love. Teresa's voice years ago. Sometimes you protect the mission by protecting the man who can finish it. I pocketed the drive and climbed back toward the light, filtering down from the laundry room. Dwight Halstead stood at the top of the stairs, blocking the doorway. He held his phone in one hand, screen glowing blue, against his face. His other hand braced against the doorframe, blocking my exit with the confidence of someone who'd never been in an actual fight. Behind him, I could hear the party crystal glasses, clinking polite laughter, people who thought they were celebrating Saskia's resilience instead of attending her last performance. I don't know what you think you're doing, Dwight said, his voice tight with the kind of anger privileged men feel when poor people don't follow instructions. But Saskia is calling the police. You're trespassing in a private residence, and whatever you took from that basement is stolen property. Property she hid in a secret room. I stayed 3 steps down eye level with his knees calculating angles. That'll sound interesting in court. You won't make it to court. He raised the phone to his ear. Saskia, he's coming up from Eat. Brent appeared behind him like a shadow gaining weight and purpose. He moved fast for someone who'd spent the last hour pretending to serve champagne in clear plates. One hand caught Dwight's wrist, torquing it down with the kind of leverage that comes from actual training. The other plucked the phone away mid-sentence. Dwight tried to pull free, grunting with effort, but Brent had 40 pounds and 8 years of mixed martial arts on him. You'll lose everything, Dwight hissed, his face reddening. Your career, your clearance, your freedom. She'll make sure you never work again. Brent's phone screen shattered under his boot heel fragments scattering across expensive tile. You already did. He looked at me over Dwight's shoulder, jerked his head toward the garage. Go. I understood what he was offering, what it would cost him. Dwight had seen him interfere, heard him destroy evidence, watched him choose sides in front of witnesses who'd remember every detail. The moment I left, Brent became an accomplice to whatever crimes Saskia wanted to invent. Assault, obstruction, aiding a fugitive if she pushed hard enough and found the right prosecutor. He'd been playing both sides since Teresa brought him in, feeding Carmela information while maintaining his security contract, with Saskia's firm walking a line so thin it didn't exist. Now he was choosing a side publicly in front of a witness who'd testify to save his own skin. They'll prosecute, I said. They'll try. He shifted his weight, keeping Dwight pinned against the doorframe with the casual efficiency of someone who'd done this before. But you'll have what you need by then. The drive, the audio, Thane. Footsteps upstairs moving fast. Security responding to the commotion, or guests coming to investigate, or Saskia herself coming to see what the delay was about. Brent, I said go. I went. The garage door was already rising Carmela's work, from outside her timing perfect. I could see her silhouette against the streetlights, hand on the remote, eyes scanning the driveway for threats. Behind me, Dwight started shouting for help, his voice cracking with panic. Other voices answered, moving fast, calling questions. I dropped and rolled under the rising door. With 6 inches of clearance, the hard drive pressed against my ribs like a promise I couldn't break. Brent met my eyes through the narrowing gap. He'd made his choice. I made mine. Then the door sealed shut, and I was running toward Carmela's sedan, while sirens started singing somewhere in the Buckhead night. The news alert lit up my phone at 11:47 p.m. Breaking statewide warrant issued for Clifford Garrison, 60. Wanted for the elimination of forensic pathologist Dr. Dean Whitaker. Carmela's sedan was still rolling when I saw the headline, 3 blocks from Teresa's old apartment, where she'd set up a safe house after the divorce. The building looked dark, except for one window on the 3rd floor, Teresa's signal that the coast was clear. I climbed the back stairs, 2 at a time, the hard drive still pressed against my ribs. Teresa met me at the door, her phone already showing the same breaking news. Dean Whitaker, the forensic pathologist who'd signed Thane's fraudulent death certificate 3 years earlier, now stared from the news footage as the compromised victim, with the authorities tracing the incident back to an item missing from my own gear. The knife I'd kept in my desk drawer until 2 weeks ago, when I'd noticed it missing but hadn't thought to mention it, because who steals a knife when they're stealing a son? Saskia, apparently. They're saying you were seen leaving his office at 9:15, Teresa said, scrolling through updates. Security footage partial plate matched to your truck. I was at the Buckhead house at 9:15. I pulled out the hard drive. 50 witnesses can confirm that. 50 witnesses who will say you were trespassing and assaulting Dwight Halstead. She took the drive, turned it over in her hands like it might explode. This better be worth a heavy criminal charge. My phone buzzed. Unknown number, Atlanta area code. I answered. Whitaker's dead. Brent's voice came through rough background noise of holding cells and steel doors. Your K-bar at the scene. They're coming for you. How long do I have? I bought you 48 hours through a friend in the judge's office. Get to Asheville. Get back. Don't waste it. The line went dead before I could ask what 48 hours had cost him. Teresa was already moving, pulling go bags from the closet she'd packed for scenarios I'd thought were paranoid 3 days ago. Carmela's tracking the GPS signal to a villa outside Asheville. 6-hour drive if you leave now. I'm leaving now. You're not going alone. She opened the apartment door. A man stood in the hallway, late 30s, compact build laptop bag over one shoulder. This is Caspian Sinclair. Former Army Signals Intelligence, worked with me at Fort Gordon before he went private. He'll handle your tech. Caspian Sinclair rode shotgun with the quiet competence of a former Army Signals Intelligence specialist. His laptop balanced on his knees as he tracked the GPS coordinates and monitored police frequencies Carmela had asked him to watch. We'd been on I-85 North for 90 minutes before he spoke. A PB just went statewide, he said, eyes on the screen. But your friend bought you something better than time he corrupted the warrant execution queue. Every precinct in Georgia thinks someone else has primary jurisdiction. How do you run from a eliminate charge when the only proof of your innocence is in the hands of the people who framed you? You don't run. You move toward the only leverage that matters. The GPS signal, I said. Still tracking. Villa outside Asheville, like Carmela said. Private property, shell company ownership. He pulled up satellite imagery. Big place. Security probably armed. Probably. We crossed into North Carolina at 12:43 a.m. The highway empty except for long-haul truckers and people running from things they couldn't name. The mountains rose black against blacker sky, swallowing the Atlanta lights behind us. My phone rang at 1:15 a.m. Unknown number, Asheville area code. I answered, and my son's voice came through the speaker for the first time in 3 years. Dad? Not a question. Statement. Controlled tone, no panic. The kind of tactical calm I'd taught him when he was 16 and wanted to learn how I'd stayed alive in places that removed better men. They moved location. It's not the villa. It's the bunker. Coordinates coming now. Are you safe? Are you... 48 hours. You have 48 hours. The line went dead. Caspian's laptop chimed. New coordinates. Different location 20 miles west of the villa Carmela had been tracking. He pulled up property records, cross-referenced shell companies, mapped the terrain. Bunker, he confirmed. Old Cold War installation, decommissioned in 1992, sold to private interests. Buried in LLC, 6 layers deep. He looked at me. Your son just handed you his real location. My son's voice, calm, precise, tactical, sounded exactly like mine had 20 years ago in Kandahar, calling in air support while insurgents closed on 3 sides. The kind of voice you use when you're not reacting to the situation, but controlling it when you've thought through every variable and decided which pieces move next. Thane hadn't called because he was desperate. He'd called because it was time. He's not running from them, I said, watching the new coordinates lock into the GPS. He's directing them, directing us. To what? A location he chose? A confrontation he designed? I thought about the audio file on the hard drive, Saskia and Virgil planning Thane's extraction like he was cargo. But cargo doesn't plant evidence. Cargo doesn't coordinate timing. Cargo doesn't call its father with updated coordinates and a 48-hour deadline that matched exactly what Brent had bought me. Thane had known about the warrant before I did, had maybe known about Whitaker before Whitaker died. Caspian pulled up thermal satellite imagery from 6 hours ago. The kind of access that costs money or favors, or both. The bunker showed heat signatures, multiple vehicles, and recent activity. He's there, Caspian said, and he's not alone. The coordinates dropped into my phone a bunker outside Asheville I'd never heard of, buried in property records under a shell company Carmela would recognize. Thane wasn't a prisoner, maybe never had been. We were all moving where he planned. The bunker sat in the mountains like a Cold War relic, concrete reinforced and half buried with 8 sentries visible in the pre-dawn darkness. We'd parked 2 miles back, hiked in through pine forest that smelled like rain and old needles. Caspian moved ahead with night vision optics, counting positions, mapping fields of fire. Carmela stayed close to my left, her breathing steady, her hand resting on the Glock she'd carried since leaving Atlanta. The hard drive pressed against my ribs, evidence that would clear my name if I lived long enough to present it. The bunker's exterior lighting was tactical, positioned to blind attackers while leaving defenders in shadow. Old military design, the kind I'd seen in Iraq when we'd cleared insurgent strongholds built by people who'd learned from our own training manuals. 2 obvious entrances, main door facing south, service entrance on the west side, both covered by overlapping fire positions. Caspian dropped back, his voice low enough that sound wouldn't carry past 20 feet. 8 outside, 3 inside confirmed, 2 entrances both covered. There's a third. I pointed east where the terrain sloped down toward a drainage culvert, half hidden by mountain laurel. Storm drain east side. Thane told me about it 6 months ago. Carmela's head snapped toward me. 6 months before he disappeared. Yeah, he knew this was coming. Not a question. She'd already connected the dots I'd been circling since his phone call, Thane describing bunker details, like he was briefing an operation, not calling for rescue. He's been planning this. Caspian pulled up thermal imaging on his laptop, traced the drain's path through the hillside. Leads directly under the Western Foundation. Old Soviet design emergency exit. Doubles as infiltration route if you know it's there. Thane had known, had described it to me over coffee one Saturday morning. Casual conversation about Cold War architecture and defensive planning. The kind of tactical discussions we'd shared since he was old enough to understand why his father came home from deployments quieter than he'd left. I'd thought he was interested in history. He'd been teaching me the battlefield. My son had been preparing this battlefield while I thought I was searching for him. Movement, Caspian said, his hand dropping to his sidearm. Curtis Stafford appeared from the tree line with 6 armed men behind him. A weathered Asheville native in his 50s, whose family had lost 300 acres to bank foreclosure land Virgil had promised to return in exchange for tonight's ambush. He carried a Remington 700 like he'd been hunting these mountains since childhood, which he probably had back when the land was still his. Virgil promised me my family's land back, Curtis said, his drawl thicker than the darkness around us. Hundreds of millions in timber and mineral rights. I'm taking over from here. His 6 men spread into a semicircle, rifles, raised but not quite pointed. The kind of positioning you use when you want leverage without committing to eliminate. Yet, Curtis? Carmela's voice carried the same calm she'd used when explaining how shell companies worked and why Saskia's contracts wouldn't hold up in federal court. How much does First Ridge Bank hold in mortgages against your current property? The hell does that? 18 million, she continued. across 4 parcels, with balloon payments coming due in March. Virgil promised you'd own your land again. I'm guessing he didn't mention I bought First Ridge 3 weeks ago. Curtis's rifle wavered. You can't. Caspian, the documents. Caspian pulled a manila folder from his pack, handed it to Carmela, like they'd rehearsed this exchange 100 times. Maybe they had. She opened it, turned pages, illuminated by tactical flashlight, her finger tracing acquisition agreements and transfer deeds that moved faster than Curtis's brain could process. First Ridge Bank purchased November 1st through a Delaware LLC control. Your mortgages, your equipment loans, your line of credit, at Asheville Feed and Supply, all mine. Your assets are frozen as of 90 seconds ago when Caspian sent the signal. Curtis looked at his phone. 3 missed calls, 2 voicemails, 1 text from his account manager at the bank that probably started with, "We need to talk." "Virgil lied to you," Carmela said, folding the documents back into her jacket. "He promised land he couldn't deliver because I already owned the leverage he was planning to use. You can walk away now, keep your pride, and maybe negotiate terms that don't involve foreclosure. Or you can raise that rifle and lose everything by sunrise." Curtis's rifle hit the ground before his pride caught up. His men lowered their weapons one by one, the kind of chain reaction that happens when money talks louder than loyalty. Curtis had brought them for a land deal, not a suicide mission. Without the promise of returned property, they were just 6 locals with hunting rifles facing a woman who'd bought their debts before breakfast. "Smart choice," Carmela said. She pulled out her phone, typed. Something showed Curtis the screen. "Transfer initiated. First month's mortgage payment deferred interest rate reduced 2 points. Consider it compensation for your time tonight." Curtis stared at the screen like it might bite him. "Walk away, Curtis. Tell Virgil I said hello." He walked his gang trailing behind him, rifles slung over shoulders, the fight gone before it started. They disappeared into the tree line the way they'd come ghosts in a conflict that had been decided by signatures and bank codes instead of bullets. Caspian packed his laptop. 16 minutes since we arrived. No shots fired. Teresa taught me that, Carmela said, checking her Glock, even though she hadn't drawn it. Financial warfare moves faster than conventional. Curtis stepped aside, his gang motionless, as Carmela folded the bank documents back into her jacket. No shots fired, no bruise spilled, just signatures and leverage. Carmela neutralized Curtis with paperwork more dangerous than any soldier. The storm drain was narrower than I'd expected, black as a rifle barrel, and I crawled forward on muscle memory 30 years old. Carmela's team had moved to the main gate, creating the kind of distraction that draws attention without triggering alarms. A vehicle breakdown, headlights sweeping across guard positions, voices raised in manufactured frustration. I had maybe 4 minutes before someone checked the eastern perimeter and noticed the storm drain grate had been removed. I moved fast, elbows, knees, breathed shallow. The drain smelled like rust and 30 years of mountain runoff. Concrete rough enough to tear skin through my jacket. Complete darkness pressed against my eyes, the kind that makes you question whether they're open or closed. I counted distance by arm lengths, mapped turns by touch, relied on instincts forged in Iraqi tunnels, where one wrong move meant fragmentation grenades bouncing toward your face. Thane had described this route 6 months ago. Every turn, every elevation change, every place where the drain narrowed to barely shoulder width. At the time, I'd thought he was sharing interesting architecture. Now I understood he'd been briefing me for an operation I didn't know I'd run. The drain opened into a vertical shaft after 80 yards. I climbed rusted ladder rungs, testing each one before trusting my weight. Above a metal grate, beyond it light. I pushed the grate aside and pulled myself into the bunker interior. Thane stood in the corner with the controlled stillness of someone who'd spent months planning this moment, 34 years old and lean like I'd been at his age, wearing his mother's college graduation ring on his right hand. No ropes, no restraints, no guards holding him at. Just my son free and waiting. "Took you long enough, old man," he said, his voice carrying the same wry edge I'd heard on the phone. The same tactical calm I'd taught him when he was 16 and wanted to understand how I'd survived things that removed better men. Shock collided with paternal relief somewhere in my chest. 3 years of searching, 3 years of thinking he was running or hiding or dead, and he stood there like he'd been expecting me for breakfast. "Thane, we don't have much time." He gestured toward the center of the room. My son wore his mother's ring, the one Teresa had given him, The day he graduated, the one he'd sworn never to take off, no matter where life took him. Virgil Mercer sat zip-tied to a metal chair in the bunker's center. Carmela's father and former financial advisor, 62, with the sunken eyes of a man who just realized his conspirator had turned the tables. Duct tape covered his mouth. His expensive suit was torn at the shoulder, a dark mark forming at his temple, where someone had struck him hard enough to split skin. The drive you're carrying is a copy, Dad. Thane held a Sig Sauer P320 loosely in his right hand, not pointed at anyone just present. The FBI's had the original for 6 months, working alongside GBY since the conspiracy crossed state lines. Every transaction, every shell company, every contract, Saskia and Virgil signed to steal Green Meridian and make me disappear. I handed it to them in May. I stared at the hard drive pressed against my ribs, the evidence I'd thought would clear my name and save my son. Then why? Because I needed you here. He held the weapon with a practiced grip, casual as checking his watch. As a witness, as a father, as the one person who'd understand what comes next. Footsteps echoed from the western corridor. Heavy boots, multiple people, the sound of someone being escorted rather than charging in tactically. Ronan appeared first, his Fallujah scars visible in the bunker's fluorescent lighting, leading rather than forcing. Behind him came Saskia. She looked different than the security footage I'd watched. No performance, no calculated grief, just exhaustion and something else. Her hand rested on a stomach that showed early pregnancy, maybe 4 months, the kind of detail that shouldn't have mattered to me, but changed everything about inheritance and asset division and who had legal claim to what. Saskia's hand rested on a stomach that shouldn't have mattered to me, but it changed everything about the inheritance. Ronan and I are having a child, Saskia said, her voice flat, like she'd rehearsed this speech and hated every word. I want half of everything Thane owns, legally, in writing, before anyone calls the FBI or the Georgia State Police or anyone else who'll complicate this. Ronan met my eyes. After Fallujah, I couldn't keep working for her. You reminded me what loyalty looked like. I'd saved his life in Fallujah by dragging him through insurgent fire while half my squad died around us. He'd recognized me at the Buckhead house, let me escape when Dwight had me cornered. Now he stood here holding Saskia's elbow, their child growing between them. His allegiance switched from employer to something more complicated. Virgil promised Saskia she'd own Green Meridian if Thane disappeared. Ronan continued. Promised me $2 million to coordinate the extraction. But Thane contacted me first, 6 months ago. Offered me something better than money. What? I asked. A way out. Ronan's hand moved to Saskia's shoulder. She wanted out too. Virgil had her locked in contracts that made her complicit whether she wanted to be or not. Thane offered us both immunity if we played along until tonight. Thane lowered the weapon completely, gesturing to Virgil, bound in the chair, to Saskia's pregnant defiance, to Ronan's switched allegiance, and to me standing there with a duplicate drive. The FBI has everything they need to prosecute Virgil for wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. But I needed everyone in the same room before they moved, everyone on record, everyone making their choice. Your choice, Saskia, Thane said, is testify against Virgil and walk away with your child and enough money to start over. Or refuse and spend the next decade explaining your signatures on documents the FBI already has. Saskia's hand tightened on her stomach. My son wasn't a hostage, he was the one running the entire perimeter, and I had just delivered the final piece of the trap. Saskia's weapon swung past me, past Thane, and leveled at Virgil's chest. You need to decide. Thane had told her moments ago, and she'd made her choice, not testimony, not compliance, but rage aimed at the man who'd orchestrated her pregnancy into a liability. Thane told me everything, Saskia said, her voice steady despite the weapon trembling in her grip. You promised Marcus half of the assets. You cut me out completely. Virgil's eyes widened against the duct tape covering his mouth. The kind of panic that comes when you realize your conspirator learned the truth you'd buried. 6 months pregnant with your security contractor's child, Saskia continued. And you told Marcus I was unstable, unreliable, that my share would go to him once I was no longer useful. Thane showed me the emails. Thane stood motionless, watching the machinery he'd built destroy itself. Ronan's hand moved to his sidearm, but he didn't draw, caught between the woman carrying his child and the man who'd promised him millions. Virgil made muffled sounds behind the tape, shaking his head, eyes darting between Saskia's line of fire and the exit he couldn't reach. Thane pulled the tape from Virgil's mouth, with the casual efficiency of someone who'd planned this moment down to the second. You were always a liability, Saskia. Virgil gasped, his voice hoarse, pregnant, and unstable. Marcus understood business. You understood drama. Greed is predictable, Thane said quietly, his voice carrying the same tactical calm he'd used on the phone, the same engineered precision I'd watched him apply to chess problems and military strategy since he was 12. You both proved it. Thane had engineered this. Fed Saskia evidence of Virgil's betrayal, watched her turn from conspirator to weapon, used their mutual distrust to collapse the conspiracy from within. How long does it take to watch a family destroy itself? Seconds or the years it took to build the hate. Movement behind Thane Ronan, lunging forward not toward Saskia, but toward my son, his hand reaching for the discarded weapon. His face twisted with the kind of desperation that comes when you realize the deal you sold your soul for was fiction. The bunker door exploded inward. Carmela burst through the breach her team had just blown open, moving faster than tactical sense allowed, throwing herself between Thane and the man who'd been her brother all along. Marcus, no. Ronan's fist caught her shoulder instead of Thane's head. The impact spun her sideways, slammed her into the concrete wall. She dropped, gasping, her hand pressed against ribs that might have cracked. Ronan froze mid-strike, staring down at the woman collapsed on the bunker floor. Carm... His voice broke on her name. What are you... Enough, Marcus. Carmela's breathing came hard and shallow, but her eyes stayed locked on his. It's over. Marcus Ronan Mercer, the security contractor I'd saved in Fallujah, Carmela's brother, Virgil's son, stood paralyzed between the sister who'd just taken a blow meant for someone else and the father who'd taught him greed mattered more than bruise. Virgil watched his daughter display genuine emotion for the first time in a conspiracy built on calculated betrayal. His face showed something that might have been regret if it hadn't arrived 20 years too late. She's your sister, I said, the pieces finally connecting. Virgil's your father. You've been working against your own family. He taught me everything I know about leverage. Marcus said, his weapon lowering, his eyes still on Carmela injured against the wall. Except how to choose what matters. Thane helped Carmela to her feet, his hand steady on her uninjured shoulder. She winced, but stayed upright, her tactical vest torn where Marcus's strike had landed. The drive, Thane said to me, activate it now. I pulled the hard drive from my jacket, found the sequence Raymond had built into the hardware. 3 buttons pressed simultaneously, a jamming signal designed to paralyze communications within a 100-yard radius. Every phone in the room went dead. Saskia's weapon clattered to the floor as her phone screen went black. Marcus reached for his radio, found nothing but static. Virgil's expensive smartwatch powered down mid-notification. Signal sent, Thane said. They're coming. Caspian appeared in the doorway behind Carmela, unarmed, his laptop secured in its case. Outside, sirens built from distant wail to immediate presence, the kind of coordinated response that meant multiple agencies converging on predetermined coordinates. Federal agents flooded through the entrance. Carmela's team had breached FBI tactical gear weapons, raised voices calling commands that echoed off concrete walls built to withstand Soviet artillery. The lead agent moved straight to Thane, lowered his weapon, spoke words I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. My son had carried this weight alone for 2 years while I thought I was searching for him. Agent zip-tied Saskia while she stood motionless, her hands still resting on the stomach that had become leverage instead of love. They secured Marcus with the kind of careful procedure that suggested he'd already negotiated terms, cooperating witness, reduced charges. Testimony that would bury his father. Virgil handled them, roughly pulling him upright from the chair where Thane had kept him bound. Reading rights he'd spent decades helping wealthy clients circumvent. Thane stood exhausted in the center of the bunker, his shoulders finally releasing tension. I hadn't noticed until it was gone. 2 years of carrying this operation, 2 years of orchestrating his own disappearance, 2 years of watching me search while he built the case that would end it. 2 years. Dad, Thane said, his voice carrying the same wry edge I'd taught him, the same paternal exhaustion I'd felt after every deployment that cost more than it returned. I've been working with them for 2 years. The sun rose over the Asheville Mountains while GBI vehicles pulled away, and Thane stood beside me in silence that felt older than both of us. The bunker sat empty behind us. Crime scene tape marking entrances where an hour ago armed conspirators had turned on each other exactly as my son had engineered. Carmela was being treated for her shoulder in an ambulance. Caspian was coordinating evidence handoff with federal agents who'd been waiting 6 months for this signal. And Thane stood next to me watching dawn break, like we were strangers who happened to share the same bloodline. I needed you activated, Dad. His voice carried the same tactical calm he'd used in the bunker, but something underneath it trembled. Not comfortable, not managing from a distance. Activated. I understood what he meant. The eviction. The threats that chase every piece designed to pull me out of retirement and into operational mode. The version of myself I'd left behind after the last deployment. You used me, I said. You used crew. I trusted you. He turned to face me, his mother's eyes looking out from a face I'd watched grow from infant to strategist. Those aren't the same thing. The hell they aren't. You taught me the difference. He gestured toward the bunker, toward the arrests, toward everything we'd survived. Trust means knowing someone will do what needs doing when it matters. Use means not caring if they survive it. I always cared if you survived. The distinction felt like splitting hairs while standing in a minefield. But I'd made the same calculation in Iraq when I'd sent good soldiers into bad situations because the mission mattered more than comfort. Crew's 5 years old, I said. And safe, because you kept him that way while I built the case that would end this. Thane's voice cracked on the word safe. I gave you the hardest job protecting my son while I played dead. Don't tell me I didn't trust you. The sun climbed higher, painting the mountains gold and red, and I realized my son had been carrying this weight alone while I'd thought I was searching for him. We'd both been searching, just in different directions. Teresa sat on the car hood with the same straight posture she'd had when we were married. My ex-wife and co-parent, the woman who'd given Thane his strategic mind and then watched him disappear into it. She held 2 paper coffee cups from a gas station 6 miles back, steam rising in the morning cold. You two done redefining your relationship? She asked, handing me 1 cup, keeping the other. For now, I said. Good, because we need to talk about what happens next. I sat beside her, the metal hood still cold from the November night. We'd been married for 8 years, divorced for 20, and somehow still raising our son's child together. He got the cold part from me, Teresa said, watching Thane coordinate with a GBI supervisor 50 yards away. The loyal part from you. The scary part is how well he combines them. Lucky kid. She laughed softly, the first genuine sound I'd heard from her in years. Lucky, that's one word for it. What's your word, Dangerous. But she smiled when she said it, the kind of parental pride mixed with terror that comes from watching your child excel at things you'd hoped they'd never need to be good at. He's better than both of us ever were. Smarter. Colder when it counts. More loyal when it matters. You blame me for that. I thank you for it. She took a long sip of coffee, grimaced at the taste, drank anyway. He disappeared for 2 years, and I knew the way mothers know things, that he was alive and working and exactly where he needed to be. That's the loyalty you gave him. The faith that some missions are worth the cost. What did you give him? The ability to calculate that cost before paying it. She looked at me over the rim of her cup. We made something remarkable, Cliff. Terrifying, but remarkable. We sat in silence, watching our son orchestrate the final pieces of an operation we were only beginning to understand. The coffee tasted like burnt regret and unexpected grace. Crew was 5 years old with Thane's dark eyes, and Teresa's careful way of observing before acting a boy who'd spent months asking where his daddy went and why Grandpa looked so tired. He sat on Teresa's apartment couch building a Lego fortress with the kind of focused intensity that ran in the family. Teresa had driven him to Atlanta, while Thane finished debriefing with GBI. I'd followed in Carmela's sedan, too exhausted to question why I was still following orders from people half my age. The apartment door opened. Crew looked up from his Legos, registered the man standing in the doorway, and froze for one heartbeat that stretched longer than the 2 years we'd all been waiting. Then he moved. Daddy. One word launched like a prayer, an accusation, and pure 5-year-old joy compressed into 2 syllables. Thane was crying. The strategic mastermind who'd orchestrated a 2-year undercover operation without breaking, who'd turned conspirators against each other with surgical precision, who'd used his own father and endangered his own son to build an airtight case against corruption. He knelt on Teresa's apartment floor and caught Crew in his arms and sobbed into the boy's hair. Hey, buddy? Thane managed, his voice breaking on every syllable. I'm here. I'm here now. You were gone. Crew said, his small hands gripping his father's jacket like he might disappear again. Grandpa said you'd come back, but you were gone so long. I know, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. No, this was what I'd been fighting for all along. Not evidence or justice or revenge, just a father holding his son and trying to explain an absence that couldn't be explained to someone too young to understand operational necessity. Thane held Crew, his shoulders shaking face buried in the boy's hair, and I stepped back from the doorway. Some moments weren't meant to be witnessed even by the grandfather who'd crossed hell to make them possible. 2 months after Asheville, I sat outside the Atlanta courthouse, watching lawyers carry verdict paperwork like receipts for justice purchased in bulk. I'd stepped back from Thane and Crew's reunion in Teresa's apartment, given them the space they needed to rebuild what 2 years had fractured. The weeks that followed had been paperwork and depositions, GBI interviews, and federal prosecutors building cases, with the evidence Thane had spent 2 years collecting. The eliminate warrant against me had been dismissed within 48 hours once Dean Whitaker's actual eliminateer, a contract operative Virgil had hired, confessed in exchange for a reduced sentence. Now the verdicts arrived like dominoes falling in the order Thane had arranged. Virgil got 25 years. RICO convictions don't leave room for negotiation when you've orchestrated conspiracy across state lines, defrauded investors of hundreds of millions, and participated in kidnapping your business partner's son. The judge had called it one of the most comprehensive financial fraud schemes she'd seen in 30 years on the bench. Saskia 18 years for eliminate conspiracy and fraud. She'd be 52 when she got out, if she got out. The child she'd been carrying belonged to Marcus now, custody awarded to the father who'd cooperated with federal investigators and turned state's evidence against everyone who'd promised him money. Carlton Phelps, the estate attorney who drafted the fraudulent trust documents and power of attorney forms that enabled Saskia's control, received 8 years and permanent disbarment. His name now a cautionary tale in Atlanta legal circles about what happens when you let greed override ethics. Dwight Halstead took 5 years for obstruction and conspiracy. He'd tried to argue he was just following legal instructions, but the emails Thane had collected showed he'd known exactly what he was enabling. Ronan Marcus Mercer cooperated fully with GBI and received a suspended sentence. His testimony had been the foundation that held up Virgil's prosecution, a son turning on the father who'd taught him that family meant less than profit. The baby he and Saskia shared would grow up knowing one parent was free and trying while the other served time for crimes committed before the child was born. Bernice turned state's witness without prosecution. Her inside information about Dwight's legal maneuvers had filled gaps in Thane's evidence, and the federal prosecutor had decided her cooperation was worth more than her punishment. Brent lost his badge but kept his freedom. The GBI made it clear his help mattered more than his methods, and the Atlanta Police Department quietly accepted his resignation rather than prosecute an officer who'd sacrificed his career to help bring down a conspiracy that stretched into their own evidence rooms. Curtis Stafford faced bankruptcy and Georgia smuggling charges for attempting to move stolen timber across state lines. The land Virgil had promised him was still foreclosed and now owned by a bank Carmela controlled. Justice, I'd learned, wasn't always immediate, but when it arrived, it brought receipts. 6 months after the bunker, I stood in Thane's office on the 14th floor of the building that used to house Green Meridian's corrupt empire and now held something cleaner. The company had been restructured under Thane's full control, stripped of the shell companies and offshore accounts that Virgil had built into its foundation. Medical technology development, legitimate research partnerships, the kind of business Thane had wanted to build before Saskia and Virgil had turned it into a criminal enterprise. Carmela worked 3 doors down as legal consultant. Her shoulder healed from the blow Marcus had landed in the bunker. She looked healthier than I'd ever seen her standing in her father's shadow, no longer. Brent Thornton served as head of internal security. The detective eliminated he'd learned in 20 years of police work, now applied to protecting the company from the kind of infiltration that had nearly destroyed it. He'd lost his badge, but found something else purpose without the politics that came with carrying a badge for the city. I want you on the board, Dad. Thane slid a contract across the desk, the same tactical precision he'd used to orchestrate a 2-year sting operation, now applied to rebuilding a company and a family. Not as a janitor, as a director. I looked at the paperwork at the salary that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago when I was cleaning floors and searching for evidence in trash bins. You don't owe me anything, I said. This isn't about owing. He leaned back in the chair that used to belong to Virgil in the office that used to represent everything corrupt about corporate power. It's about having the right people, and you're one of them. I don't know anything about medical technology. You know about integrity, about making hard decisions when comfortable ones are available, about protecting what matters, even when the cost is everything you have. He tapped the contract. That's what I need on this board. Not yes men who'll rubber stamp whatever I propose. People who'll tell me when I'm wrong because they care more about what's right than what's easy. I picked up the contract, read the terms that restored not just income, but dignity. Board member, director of strategic operations. The kind of title that came with responsibility and respect. The kind of position men my age retired from rather than into. Carmela helped draft it, Thane added. Brent reviewed the security protocols. Teresa consulted on the compensation structure. This isn't charity, Dad. It's the company we're building clean, legitimate, and staffed by people who prove they'll choose right over easy when it matters. Through his window, I could see Atlanta stretching toward the horizon, the city where I'd been evicted and framed and hunted now, offering a view from the 14th floor of a building my son controlled. I looked at the contract at my son across the desk at the city beyond his window. Board member of a medical technology company, not bad for a man who jumped out second-story windows and crawled through storm drains 6 months ago. 1 year after the bunker, we stood in the Buckhead house with paint cans and brushes reclaiming it room by room. I'd signed the board contract, accepted the position that restored dignity to a man who'd spent months cleaning floors while searching for his missing son. The salary meant I could afford this, buying back the house that Saskia had stolen, the home where Thane had grown up, and where crew deserved to build memories that weren't tainted by conspiracy and fraud. We could have hired contractors. Thane had the money, the connections, the ability to make a single phone call and have professionals transform the space in a week. Instead, we painted it ourselves, 3 generations working shoulder to shoulder, choosing the slow way because it meant something the fast way never would. The crew was 6, now tall enough to reach the wall with a brush if he stood on the stepladder Thane had positioned carefully in the living room. Blue paint covered his hands and most of his face, evidence of enthusiasm exceeding technique. Grandpa, look. He dragged the brush across the fresh white wall in a crooked zigzag that would have horrified any professional painter. I made lightning. Thane stood behind him, roller in hand, watching his son's imperfect contribution to the wall we'd spent 2 hours preparing. I waited for him to correct it, to gently redirect crew towards something neater, to apply the same strategic precision he'd used to orchestrate a 2 year sting operation. Instead, Thane set down his roller, picked up a second brush, and handed it to crew. Good start, buddy, he said quietly. Want to add more? My son, who'd orchestrated a 2 year undercover operation without breaking, who'd turned conspirators against each other with surgical precision, who'd calculated every variable except how to be present for the child. He'd protected from a distance, just let a crooked zigzag stay on the wall because his boy had painted it. The strategist learning that fatherhood meant choosing connection over perfection. The women's prison sat in the Atlanta suburbs, concrete and razor wire housing people who'd made choices they couldn't unmake. I signed in, passed through security, and sat in the visiting room behind a glass partition that smelled like industrial cleaner and regret. Saskia appeared diminished, without makeup or designer clothes, her hair pulled back in a way that aged her beyond her years. 18 years remained on her sentence, minus whatever time good behavior might buy her, and she sat across from me with the hollow eyes of someone who'd traded everything for money and discovered it purchased nothing worth having. We sat in silence for 2 minutes before I placed the photograph on the visitor shelf between us. Thane and Saskia's wedding day, baby crew in Teresa's arms. Me standing beside Thane with my hand on his shoulder, the proud father who'd thought his son had found love worth building a life around. This is what you destroyed, I said. Thane wanted you to see it. Saskia stared at the photo like it might burn her fingers if she touched the glass. Forgiveness. I'd learned didn't require reconciliation, it just required letting go of the knife you'd been holding. Does he... Her voice came out hollow, scraped raw by months of asking questions nobody answered. Does Crew remember me? He asks sometimes. Thane tells him his mother made mistakes and is paying for them, and that someday, when he's older, they'll talk about what forgiveness means. But not reconciliation. No, not that. She nodded, accepting the distinction because she had no choice because the glass partition and the 18 years remaining weren't negotiable. Thane has forgiven you, I said, standing, but justice hasn't. I walked out before she could respond, leaving the photograph on the shelf where she could stare at what she'd traded for money that never arrived. The Buckhead house porch felt different in November evening light, same stone steps where I'd sat a year ago in the rain evicted, and desperate watching my grandson's toys get locked behind an iron gate I couldn't open. But the gate stood open. Now the lock removed warm light spilling from windows I'd helped paint that afternoon. Crew slept in my lap, exhausted from running between rooms and painting crooked zigzags on every wall Thane would allow. 6 years old and rosy from a day spent building something with his father and grandfather, the kind of ordinary childhood moment that costs nothing and means everything. Inside, Thane moved behind the windows, cleaning brushes and putting away paint cans, the strategic mastermind who'd learned to value messy blue lightning bolts because his son had painted them. I looked at the Atlanta streets spreading below the hill, the city that had framed me for eliminate and hunted me through storm drains and bunkers. Now just lights in the distance while I sat on a porch I owned. Nothing profound occurred to me. No great wisdom about resilience or family or justice earned through suffering. Just the weight of my grandson breathing against my chest, the sound of my son washing dishes in the kitchen, the November air cool enough to need a jacket, but not cold enough to go inside yet. Home wasn't a place you found, it was a place you built one crooked brushstroke at a time. The porch light stayed on. Crew's breath rose and fell against my chest, steady and warm. Inside, Thane laughed at something playing on his phone, a sound I'd fought a year to hear again, crossing through conspiracies and violence, and the systematic dismantling of everything I'd thought I understood about trust. 60 years old, and I was finally home. Not the home I'd left when I deployed to Iraq at 23. Not the home I'd lost when Teresa and I divorced after 8 years of trying to be people we weren't. Not even the home I'd imagined when Thane was born, and I'd thought fatherhood meant having all the answers. This home built from crooked paint and hard-won forgiveness, and a grandson sleeping in my arms while his father cleaned up inside. The kind of home you earn by refusing to give up even when giving up makes sense. The gate stood open. The light stayed warm. Crew's weight pressed against my ribs like proof that some things were worth every cost. 60 years old, finally home. Full circle complete. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Sometimes the people we think need rescuing are the ones protecting us all along. I made the mistake of thinking I was alone in this fight. For 3 years, I believed I was the only one searching, the only one who cared. I worked menial jobs, crawled through storm drains, jumped from windows, all while thinking my son needed saving. The truth was, harder he trusted me enough to let me think I was lost, because that's what made me dangerous to the people who'd taken everything. This father revenge story taught me that vengeance isn't always violent. Sometimes it's patient, calculated, and built on trust that looks like abandonment. Real family stories revenge themselves through justice, not destruction. When someone you love disappears, your instinct is panic. But I've learned that faith in family, in God's perfect timing, can be the sharpest weapon you carry. My son didn't need me to find him. He needed me to become the man who could stand beside him when truth surfaced. That's what father revenge truly means, becoming dangerous through loyalty, not rage. If this father revenge journey moved, you share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to trust someone when everything looked hopeless? These family stories revenge teach us we're not alone. Subscribe to Father's Vengeance for more family stories, revenge showing how ordinary people fight extraordinary battles. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Thank you for staying until the end. Your time means everything. Final reminder, some details have been fictionalized for storytelling. What matters is the lesson that patience, trust, and faith can turn even the darkest moment into something worth fighting for.